Good evening and welcome to part 10 of Mapping Kalegen. I can't believe we're on part 10 already. For those of you who have joined us for the previous 9 parts, you'll already know what we're about to do. For those of you who haven't, get strapped in. I'll give a quick introduction and then we'll get going. Loosely, we are going to be mapping the city of Kalegen, which has already had a ton of it put in place, about a third so far. Kalegen is a very important city in the Reikland. Reikland being part of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, the role-playing game that we're making this map for. And we today are going to be finishing off the large State Army fort down in the bottom corner of the map, which is over here. And then after that, assuming all goes well, we will be moving up to the old Temple of Mor, pardon me, the old Garden of Mor up in the corner. That's the graveyard where the God of Death presides. So, like normal, the way we'll be handling this is I will map. You can drop comments. I will bring the comments up. We will discuss those comments and then decide whether we're going to drop them into the map or not. And then I will map again. And then you can drop comments. And then we'll decide whether we're dropping them into the map or not and get straight back in again. I'll be bringing the comments up like so. As Yalib says, part 10, not even halfway through. Yeah, it's a thing, isn't it? We're probably going to be doing this for about, I don't know, 30 parts maybe? Who can be sure? The bloke person has also arrived. Hello, the bloke person. Hi, everyone. Delighted to see you here. And Yelp says, hi, Andy. Hi, chat. And that's how we'll be bringing up the comments as we go. I will also say that today my hand is very sore, and not for dodgy reasons. I was out in my back garden finishing off the last touches on our big 7-foot by 7-foot table. And that was surprisingly hard work. So, let's see how long I last today with the actual mapping. Got my pen in hand. I'm ready to go. Alexander says, good evening. Good evening to you, Alexander. Yalib also says, wait, no Wild Town is planned tonight. They're never planned. They just happen. And then Martin says, is it just me or does the road into the castle look like Nurgle's symbol? I had not even noticed that. That is an interesting note. Possibly we should use that. Only comments and mapping. Yeah, I heard it, Yalib. Alexander then says, we need to talk about the fake soup kitchen. Yeah, apparently we've got an issue with a soup kitchen that's missing over in one of the parts of town. We'll get to that in a moment. Before we do, though, a couple of extra bits and pieces that I'm going to say. Number one, if you would like to get involved with helping us build Kalegen, Kalegen has its own channel over on our Discord. That's the Lawhammer Discord. Feel free to jump down in there. Every single location that we have discussed in any one of our previous 9 channels, I believe, now has its own little thread added. So you can add your own ideas, suggest NPCs, suggest ways of the location being used with adventure hooks if you wish. As we've discussed already, everything that we are building in this stream is going to get put over into World Anvil, which is a big database of awesome. If you haven't checked World Anvil out, you should go do so. And we're going to be using World Anvil to track every single location from the Kalegen that we build. We'll probably do about 2 paragraphs for every location unless we decide to do something bigger. The first paragraph will discuss the location, what it looks like, where it's sited, what it feels like to approach the place, for example. The second paragraph will discuss who lives there, the primary NPCs that are involved with it. And then we'll do at least 2 adventure hooks for each one of the various locations that we had as well. And given that we're somewhere in the region of, I don't know how many it was, I think Martin set up all the threads and he said there was something like 100 or so locations already. Is that the case? Is it really that many? Whatever. If it is that many, we'll have at least that many to write. So if you want to help out, make sure you do. I had somebody ask about 4 or 5 weeks ago to help out, but I can't find their post. So if you happen to be watching right now and you offer to help and you sent me over something, please get back in contact again because we had a whole discussion there, but I literally can't find it. So please ping me over in Discord. But other than that, let's take a look at what we have. I'm going to ping up the comments first. We were there. Esty says, evening, everyone. Evening, Esty. Delighted to see you here. Yalib says, shape of that road is fully a coincidence. Yeah, definitely nothing chaotic about that road in the slightest. And it was fully a coincidence in terms of us making it. Alexander R then says, it's a product of pure random chance, also known as chaos. And Martin says there are 76 locations so far. Let's see if we can add a few more this evening. Also, we have a new comment in coming from Croys. Am I pronouncing that correctly? If not, please put another comment in to confirm. Hey, I'm not sure if you answered this in another stream. Are you a fan of using Reichspiel or Pseudo-German to name parts, landmarks, and cities, or do you prefer using English names? Right, this is actually worth discussing. In general, you'll find that most locations in the official Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay stuff, whether I made it or other people made it, uses English for the vast majority of things, except for things like names, place names, so a village name or a town name or similar. But even then, sometimes it lapses into English. As much as the pseudo-German empire setup, which is, of course, very loosely based on the Holy Roman Empire, is a starting point. It most certainly isn't the midway or ending point for the vast majority of the material that's created for the game. It's an inspiration rather than necessarily being a rule. Now, in previous books, we've discussed whether we should use, for example, translated German versions of the districts inside a city, or whether we should just use English versions. For example, the difference between saying something like, I don't know, Merchant's Quarter, or alternatively, the German equivalent. And generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, English sort of wins about 60 to 70% of the time. And bluntly, that's loosely where this map will land as well. In that we are going to end up with a variety of interesting district names that get dropped in, many of which are going to be relatively new, because this city is mostly a new build for the last 50 to 100 years. So most of what we're putting down here is new. But having said that, though, that doesn't mean that it won't have names, because these new locations will have had their own names, as in, for example, we're now building this part of town. They will name that part of town, and very possibly they'll be named after, given the location of this one, important members of the Halskrug family, for example. The Halskrugs, after all, are the local rulers, and they're also exceedingly important. The House Halskrug, after all, were previous emperors of the entire empire, not more than 200 or so years ago. Having said that, though, it was during the massive breakup, the time of woe, shall we say, the Dark Ages, when the empire, it was really only the electoral emperors that they represented, so a third of the empire at most, and even then they barely represented those, given that places like Sudan's, the Vorbergland, for example, the Vorbergland was ruled over by a king and not ruled over by the electoral emperors, but that's by the by. So loosely, am I a fan of using Reichspiel? Yes. Or pseudo-German names and landmarks for the cities? Yes. But do I prefer using English names? Prefer would be too strong, but I do it a lot, largely because that's what Warhammer does. So a nice mixture of the two is largely where we'll land. Yalab then adds to that, feel like the naming convention for Warhammer is take a name that sounds funny to an English ear, maybe translate it to fake German-ish. Yes, that is often the case. Love to say it's like more like Once Upon a Team. Well, Once Upon a Team, I had a conversation about this with Graham. Yeah, absolutely. And that's not uncommon. Taking, for example, Dam and Blast, which is just Dam and Blast, one of the primary names in, say, Rough Nights and Hard Days. The House Dam and Blast is obviously not a German name, but it's made to sound like it could be Dam and Blast, much like Once Upon a Team as well. And as Croy say, took me a long time to get, I've been playing the game for years before I found out about that one. And I've been using the name as well, and hadn't cottoned on. And it must have been, let me see, when I first started playing, I was a teenager, and it was in my mid-20s that I was saying it out loud, and it just suddenly dawned on me. So I must have been using it for a good 10 years. So you're not alone in missing that one. Thanks for the answer, says Croy. Not a problem at all. Feel free to ask any questions as we go. Alexander then says, as a German speaker, I don't get Once Upon a Team. Once Upon a Team is Once Upon a Time. So Once Upon a Team, pronounced and as an English speaker would probably pronounce a German, is just Once Upon a Time. And yeah, there you go. But an Arschloch, let's Let's not even talk about that. And Once Upon a Team is Once Upon a Time, indeed. Right, so let's move on. We're going to be diving into the State Army Barracks down in the bottom corner of the map. Now, if you were watching with us last week, you'll notice that I've done a little bit extra on top of where we were, but not much. I made the buildings all a little bit bigger to try and accommodate what is a regiment of troops plus all the requisite noble families that are a part of that. But I still feel like it's perhaps a little bit too small. So I'm going to start today by bolstering up some of the barrack buildings down at the bottom of the map. So that's this area here, he said, looking at the ridiculous brush that he's currently using. So we've got the main fortification up there. We've got a Templus Sigmar there. We've got the old regimental museum, which is being put in place, replacing one of the older barracks with a regimental museum, so that the House Hallskrug folks can take the visiting dignitaries on a whirlwind tour of just why their regiment is absolutely awesome. But the actual soldiers themselves need a bit more space, and that's over there in the main barracks. And currently they don't really have it. So building up that area, I think, would be a good idea. And if anyone's got any other ideas for anything to pop in here, now is the time to say them. My first job will be filling out a little bit of extra space in there for our soldiers, and then once that's done, coloring it all in. So if you think there's anything else that we should have inside our State Army barracks here, now's the time to say it. I'm going to add in a little bit of extra here and build it up for a second barracks, which I'm going to pop up in the top corner. I'm also going to change my eraser size because it's currently huge and not done. So I'm going to quickly add in a little bit extra up here. If you've got anything else you think that should be added, drop it into the comments, and I'll check the comments once I've added in this second barracks building into place, and then added the requisite roads to make that work. We're keeping these buildings relatively simple. And as I've discussed multiple times in the previous streams, if you want to know how to map like this, then there is a tutorial that I did for Inside the Rookery, which is available over on Patreon. If anyone wants some deets for that, just ask either in the comments and I'll find a link, or alternatively, pop over to our Discord where we have all the details over there. I'm not using any techniques other than the ones that I used in that tutorial. So you're not going to find anything special or different in what I'm doing here. This is just what I did in the tutorial. So that means I'm not using any fancy brushes or extra brushes or special things, what I might do if I were doing it for myself. That's largely so that you can definitely try to copy everything that we're doing here. So just quickly putting this into place, extra location for a bit more troops. If we're looking at a barracks here, which has got 3 floors, I think that's actually going to be more than big enough. You can get a surprisingly large amount of soldiers into a small area if you desperately wish to. That's not too bad. If anyone's got any opinions as to the size and whether we think it should be bigger or smaller, do drop them into the comments. I'm about to go check those before I declare that I think I'm probably ready. I'm going to add an extra building in up here as well, possibly a detachment barracks or staff for the State Army. Okay. I think we have got that in place. So I'm going to go check the comments, see if there's anything else that we have in there. Feels like we need to lose one of the large rocks in the northern part and drop a dormitory for the wizards in its place, possibly with a walkway to one of the towers. So we're not doing that because the wizards are going to be up in the main fort itself. One of those towers is going to be the wizards tower. So we don't need any further barracks. Wizards are relatively rare in the greater scheme of things. So we're not going to have like a bank of wizards sitting there. Each one of these are massive force multipliers that can wipe out regiments by themselves loosely, particularly the old battle war wizards that we could potentially have attached to this. That said, I've just remembered something which you're probably about to remind me of, which is that there's currently a deal with the Bright College, isn't there? And we do need buildings for those. Yeah, good point. Well made. And we need that. So we're probably looking for an apprentice barracks for maybe 10 to 15 Bright Wizard apprentices to properly support that. We're going to want it to be a heptagram. So we want to have ourselves, not a heptagram, probably heptical. We want to have ourselves a 7-sided tower. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yep, 7. A 7-sided tower because 7 is the number of the Bright College. We can have a burning flame at the top of that. For those with the sight, some burning actuary wells coming down. We need to have that separate from the primary barracks because no one's going to want to be beside these crazy dudes. And that'll do for them. Yeah, that'll probably work. Let's give it its own little area at the front. Yeah, that'll do. Okay, so good point, well made. I don't think we need to lose one of the rocks because getting the idea that this place is built in an existing area, and regardless of their individual preference, there are big rocks that they're not going to be able to easily move. Fortified locations often have these sitting through them if they're built on a large rocky outcrop. Would it be possible that during peacetime parts of regiments are living outside of the fortification and during a siege it gets quite cramped? Yeah, I mean, it could do, but this fort was originally the only building that they had. About 100 years ago, the entirety of the state regiment was held here, and there was only a small village sitting down here, which is approximately about that area's worth. So I don't think that it will be that cramped. This place was the entirety of the local. I mean, truth be told, this was its own separate settlement that was largely self-sustaining. With a whoops, pardon me, I've zoomed in far too far. With a connection through to the Temple of Mor up there, the old one which has crumbled away, a direct connection down through to the old Temple of Sigmar over here, which is where they used to gather, and we have a chapel of Sigmar on the inside as well. So I think it could potentially be a bit cramped if everyone was in, but rather than say that they're going to be on the outside of the town, I think it's more likely they're going to be off on patrol and doing state army things. Yeah, so let's move on from that one. Martin Rook says, would a well house be visible on the map or just assumed? I mean, it's kind of assumed. I mean, we can do the whole, igneous rock, water rising up on the inside or dug down, or the water. I mean, it could be any of the smaller buildings that are kicking around. I think assumed is better than necessarily marking it out. And he mentioned last stream that the fort needs to be able to house the entire regiment, circa 800 stoop staff, even if not all of them might actually be living there. Absolutely. And I think that's the case. And I think if all 800 are there, though, I think you're correct, Alexander. It's going to be relatively tight in here. But tight in that all the rooms are probably going to be used. And I'm not saying necessarily all the rooms up in the fort, because many of these rooms will have, to use an archaeological term, ceremonial purposes. In that there's going to be refectories and such like down by the main barracks. But up here, we're going to have lots of rooms that are put aside for the nobles to do their noble things. Whether that's the grand ballroom or whatever equivalent we decide to put on in there. Ballroom is perhaps not necessarily the thing you'd expect. Yal then says, we want to have wizards come here to train. Absolutely. So we probably don't want highly explosive apprentices in the main castle. And I agree. I've separated them now. You found space for a dormitory without removing rocks, so that's even better. Yeah, I did, didn't I? Popped it up there. So I think that works. And then Alexander says, wouldn't a tower outside of the walls be a nice place, a bit like one of the towers in the Greyjoy Castle, in case they combust spontaneously, no fire starters within the fortifications? I think that would be the ideal. And if we had already, we could pop them elsewhere and have a nice little bridge going over to it. But that gives the feeling of something that's been established for a long time, and they've used that for a long time. You could argue that the separate promontory got sequestered by Bright Wizards at a later date, and then they built over to it. But it's all highly expensive. I think I prefer the idea that they're on the inside, because that's got more chances of explosively going wrong. And I think that could be one of the adventure hooks, where a young Bright Wizard to be loses control, perhaps having the equivalent of a wet dream, and it all goes crazy. Fire goes off, it blows up everything, and he wakes up in the middle of a completely shattered area, fire having washed outwards for a good 30, 40, 50 meters, causing all manner of problems for anyone who's not a Bright Wizard. And one of the reasons why the Bright College very carefully holds on to many of its apprentices is because the bright wind, when it goes off, sets everything on fire, which means that their individual building there will almost certainly have to be largely made of stone and metal. Could be an interesting architectural building in general, and I think that potentially could be a fun description to put up. Yalb says we talked briefly about possible Danska last stream. That didn't end up manifesting. Yeah, it didn't, did it? Have any opinions on that and exactly how it could go, or are we happy with where it stands? But that wasn't ever related to the Wizards, just a possible Latrine Tower. Yeah, it was. Nico's popped in. Hi, Nico. Delighted to see you dropping into the comments. Hello, and hello in turn. Delighted to see you here. Right, I think we've probably got enough to go with. I'm going to start coloring in. For those of you who haven't been in the previous streams, all of our primary locations, that's the locations that we're going to describe in depth. Oops, pardon me. Let's change that. Describe in depth on the World Amble account, and also over on Discord now, I suppose. They go in purple. These are the important locations. For those of you who've seen, for example, the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay starter set, you'll see we used a similar idea there, which was all of the special locations got their own color, as did all their own districts. It's something that I often do, even though it's not necessarily, well, it's not realistic in the slightest, but that does make the map super easy to read for someone who's coming to it for the first time. And as we all know, these are tools to aid play, not to confuse. And it can sometimes be super hard picking out locations if they all have the same basic color, or pardon me, loads of different colors all over the place. It can be just hard to find them on the map and where they are. So keeping the color scheme consistent makes it easier to reference. Now, our big fort up here is clearly potentially multiple locations in one. And I think that this is, if we were making a book of this location, this is a classic example of a location that, although it is one place, would probably be given at least a double or 4-page spread so that you could go through all the various details of the important individuals who may live there or the special rooms that it contains. Loosely, again, we probably wouldn't go for more than around maybe about 4 or 5 paragraphs describing the main area itself. One paragraph describing arriving, perhaps. The next paragraph describing how it appears. The next paragraph describing primary chambers. And then maybe the next paragraph describing, I don't know, whatever else you might find that's useful for that. And then moving on to the NPCs. I'm going to pop the chapel in as its own location as well. So much like we used a nice little Sigmarite chapel in the starter set, I'm going to pop out the museum as a special location. Because that speaks directly to the primary tone and theme of Kalegen, which is that what is more important to the local duke is that the locations can be visited by dignitaries so he can boast, which means that potentially supporting what Alexander said earlier, it does get tight because some of the buildings that had previously been put aside for troops no longer are used. Do I want to mark out the primary barracks, or does that just get taken up in the castle description for the area? I think it does. I don't think we necessarily need to pull out any of the barracks. We could pull out some of the individual officers' holdings. But again, do we need to? Not sure that we do. We do want to do the Bright Wizards. So let's mark those out. And do we want to do anything else? I don't think we need to mark out the Gates House. I don't think it's its own special location. The remainder of it can be all wrapped up into the description of the district, which is the description, obviously, of the State Army Barracks. So I think that's probably okay with 4. If anyone thinks that we should have anything extra, do drop it into the comments and we'll pick that up. Before I take up the rest of the comments, though, I'm going to do the rest of the buildings and mark them out. We have a color for primary walls, which is currently yellow. That makes them all nicely stand out. I shall pop that in here. And once I've done that, I will then do the main buildings. I don't know if I did yellow for the... No, I didn't. So I'll take that off the tower color there. They should be buildings. All right, let's continue on with our walls. And then once I've done the walls, I will quickly color in the buildings, run through the comments, and then we'll start the process of highlighting and shading all of this. Again, if you've got any questions about what we've done so far, feel free to ask. If you've got any further suggestions for what we're doing here, then feel free to drop them in too. As an alternative, we're going to be, after we do this, moving on to the Old Garden of Moor. So if you've got any ideas for that, now is also a good time to bring those up, and we can potentially discuss those out as we go. Okay, so that's most of the walls done. Popped into place. Let's now get our building color. I'll then go check the comments, and then we'll do our highlights and shades and get those into place. Oops, I'm being a bit messy here. Yeah, okay. This is quite a fun location. I quite like the look of it. Quite like how it's all turned out. I'm trying to think out what we said in the previous streams about any of the individuals who are here. We've got a regiment of about 800. We've got the officer who's somewhat keen on chariots. I imagine he lives in the main castle, but he could live out in his own building, I suppose. Do we have any other characters that are specifically called out as being up here? If you can recall any, please drop them into the comments and we can discuss whether we want to mark out a special location for them or whether we just include them in the main castle area. We've got some nice towers down here as well. I think this is the sort of location that if I was writing this for a book, it'd probably want to have its own special map because there's so many cool little nooks and crannies in this place, and you'd want to detail them, possibly even go for an isometric map so you can actually take a good look. A classic pictorial castle map that you're used to seeing in kids' books. That'd probably be a good example of what to do here. Warhammer that up a little bit, and I think that would look pretty goddamn cool. I seem to recall seeing this on a stream once with who was it with? Oh, I remember. It was with no, it wasn't. I was a guest on a stream. It wasn't one of our streams. And we were discussing some of the best ways to do world building and how much detail you should or shouldn't do. And I somewhat controversially said, go to kids' books, because kids' books are particularly good at summarizing key important details of locations. And that was deemed to be somewhat controversial by some. But it was a good way to demonstrate that you want to make sure, particularly if you're doing someone else's IP, or providing information for GMs, you want to give them enough so that they're inspired, but not so much that they feel they can't create their own stuff and add in their own details. Anyway, let's just finish off. We're almost done here. I think this place, when it's all highlighted and shaded, is going to actually look pretty funky, actually. really helps pull the whole place together as a location once you start seeing all the colored shapes moving into place. Wow, my hand is aching. As I mentioned at the beginning of the stream, I was building a table in my back garden all afternoon. And by building a table, I mean we're going to be, as I have mentioned multiple times, streaming The Enemy Within from my living room. And we've built ourselves a big 7 foot by 7 foot table. And we were just doing the final finishing off parts of it this afternoon. And holy moly, has that minced my hand. So yeah, I'm going to be whining my way through the stream today, as every single last thing I draw causes my hand minor agony. Right, okay, we've got the main colors in place. Kind of like this. I'm liking the shapes. Okay, let's have a quick check at all the comments, and then I'll go into the highlights and shades or redraw some parts if any of the comments suggest that we should re-examine this. Right, so Yalab says 4 pages may not be enough for the castle. You'll be surprised. You can get a surprising amount of detail into about 4 pages. If you take, for example, the Ubersreich book, that's a good example of squeezing an awful lot of information into a very short amount of space. In Ubersreich, you've got Black Rock. Black Rock is arguably one of the most important fortifications in the Reikland. Yet we managed to get an awful lot about that location into just, I think it was only 2 pages for Black Rock. Plus, we had 1 page for the main thing, 1 page for the NPCs. Was there any more? You can get an awful lot of information in if you're careful and you're concise with how you describe it. Esty says, so in keeping with the Lucky Nurgle connection we've made for ourselves, maybe the barber surgeons attached to the regiment have been infiltrated by a cultist or two. Yeah, I think we could play with that, actually. But it does seem a bit on the nose. Oh, I missed a bit of the there. Given that if we're taking a coincidence and making that something, that seems a bit weird, because this is either a coincidence, and this is most definitely not some sort of dodgy Nurgle symbol sitting up here. Or alternatively, it's not a coincidence, which means it's been built into place for potentially hundreds of years. And if that's the case, that's what we'd want to manifest. We wouldn't want to have just some weird random nonsense being attached to it. A random cultist has appeared and done something, or alternatively, they're using the rune. But you can find runes of dark gods and pretty much anything if you look hard enough. After all, we are pattern seekers in general. It's what we do. I don't know if we want to make that a thing or not. What does everyone else think? I kind of like it, but at the same point, I kind of like it just being a road. Esty then says, an incompetent colonel lives in the castle, I suppose. We do have somewhat of an incompetent colonel living up here. At least that was one of the suggested NPCs in the previous streams. Yal then says, New Fallion got 1.5 pages for a castle itself and like 9-10 pages for various inhabitants. Is that an extra PDF? Because in the Ubersreich book, New Fallion, I think, only got like, I don't know, about a page, I think. I got JG to do a picture of it, as I recall. Blackrock Castle only, in fact, got a half column in there. So I presume that's an extra PDF that was added on top. I don't know if I've read that one. I should check. We had the Goofy Colonel who's in the chariots. We did. We had the High Elven advisor who's also a bit lofty and possibly slightly Azure inclined. Agreed. And we have to decide where he lives. Does the castle already have a stable for the regiment and any fancy old world mounts? You know, that's a good one, Devin, and great to see you making comments. The classic would be Flying Monster. And whether you go for, say, the Empire Army list from 4th edition, where you could have almost anything ranging from dragons to hippogriffs to griffins to whatever, or later army lists where they tended to hone in and try to give each army its own individual character. So only one magical type of beast was appropriate. Like, for example, a griffin for the Empire. You can't be riding a manticore, and you certainly can't be riding a giant scorpion. That's right out. And then later on, of course, we've got the addition of things like demigryphs for a knightly order. Now, we don't have a knightly order here, so I don't think demigryphs would be wise. I don't think it would necessarily work for them, although it wouldn't surprise me if one of the officers had a demigryph pet or something like that, because that could be quite fun. I think our colonel is not the sort to be riding any sort of monstrous mount. And if we're going to be having some sort of monstrous mount, we need to have an entire story for how that came about. Having said that, though, we are looking at an old State Army fortification that's been self-sufficient for some time. So I think it's very likely that in the past, there might have been somebody who had some form of big flying mounty thing, a griffin with a nest or a hippogriff or something like that. And I think incorporating that would be a really good idea. Something that was used in the past but isn't used anymore, that can then turn into a fun adventure hook where we can have some officer deciding that, you know, today's the day where we're going to try and get ourselves an egg, and we're going to make that egg hatch, and we're going to train up that thing, and we're most definitely not going to get eaten by it. That's what we want to do. So we could perhaps have an overeager officer attempting to gain some sort of impressive, spectacular mount to impress either his peers or a future spouse or something like that. Or alternatively, we could have them taking a more sensible route where they task soldiers, PCs, or whomever to find an amber wizard. And we are very close to the Amber Hills, so this is most certainly not beyond the realms of possibility. To find an amber wizard to help them either capture and sorcel or otherwise get a magical mount. If we're doing that, though, we need to have it as a location, and I quite like it. Potentially, we've got an obvious space here at the back that we could easily turn into what may once have been some form of airy for one event. So let's do that. And perhaps have it connected through to the back of the building there. So we'll be looking for, get onto my lines, perhaps, let's drop that down in size 4, that's better. So a cave entrance, which has a small tower attached to it at the side. Steps that lead down to it from leading into a small road that connects through to the back in there. And then probably there's going to be some sort of nowadays there'll be maybe a cannon or two sitting there that's been wheeled down and put into place, because there's no actual flying mount there at the moment, but there used to be in the past for one of the previous officers. I quite like that. It gives you that feeling of Warhammer, the fantasy battle game, while simultaneously giving you that feeling of Warhammer fantasy roleplay, where things are rarely quite as perfect as they often appear in the fantasy battle game. So yeah, I quite like that as a location. Something to play with there. Let's pop on a location marker there, and we'll highlight the edge of the cave like so as well. Wall color, put that back into place, and then get my building color on there. Excellent. Okay, I quite like that as an idea. We'll worry about how that looks a little bit after. That makes for a fun location that really reinforces what's going on here. Wouldn't surprise me actually if the Hallskrugs would be very keen to try and get some sort of creaturey thing in there as well, just to show off about having their state regiment being supported by a big flying creature of some sort, or alternatively trying to get hold of some Pegasi or something. Yeah, there could definitely be something in that. There's all sorts of hooks we could use there. Yeah, then says, we talked about the museum briefly. We didn't end up having any NPCs there, but some sort of custodian probably goes there. I agree. And that'll be something that we'll worry about when the actual writing up of it takes place. If you've got any ideas for the sort of NPC that could be there, drop into our Discord channel. In fact, I'm just going to go grab a link from that right now, so that I can invite people like so. And let's edit the invite link so that it can be used forever. And I shall bring it up as a comment. Here we go, Control C, and pop that into the stream comment stream there. Okay, so if you've not been in our Discord, go jump in now and go say hello. And if you've got any ideas for the sorts of NPCs that we could put into that museum, or indeed any of the other locations here, feel free to jump into the Kalegen channel and just throw your ideas out there. Now, we might not use all of them. We might use some of them. If you've seen any of our previous streams, you often hear me rubbish ideas that other people think are cool. And equally, I jump on ideas that other people think are stupid, because that's just the nature of this, isn't it? So, yeah, if you've got ideas for that, do throw them in. The bloke person then says, could Chariot Man have a wing in the museum dedicated to chariots with poorly made but gaudy replicas of other species? I'm going to choose rather than races, because they're most certainly not different races of humanity. So species chariots, like a Kemrian chariot made out, well, that is a different race. I stand corrected. Made out, oh, if it's undead, probably not. Made out of local wood and painted gold. I actually quite like the idea of that. Yeah, tasked to try and make something impressive, and what does he go and do? Fakes a whole bunch of shit. That actually fits the whole tone of the place really quite well. I think that, yeah, we definitely could do that, and possibly have some nonsense in there as well, like, oh, here's an old Bretonian chariot. Bretonians known for their love of chariots. Yeah, that could be quite fun. Yeah, I quite like that. I definitely think there's something in that for the museum. Yalab then says museum was intended to be a whole screw project intended to elevate the history of the family, so I don't know if he'd be given into that. Yes, I agree. But I think that there is nothing wrong with the best intentions not necessarily coming out as intended. As we all know, the people in charge say, this is what's going to happen. And then the people who are implementing it come out and go, well, I think that means this, and do something that's sometimes wildly different. And then the people who are reporting them listen to the wildly different idea and do something completely different on top of that. And then things are done, and the people at the very top come along and go, what is all this nonsense? This isn't what I wanted. Miscommunication is frequent, particularly when we're going to have a Duke who's going to be in here very rarely, where he's going to be a very busy man going from A to B, often in the capital, dealing with important diplomatic issues. He's the head of spies in the Reikland, so he's going to be dealing with spy matters all over the place, and we probably should drill down in that when we move over to the palace as well. And then he's also going to be down in Nuln a lot as well. Nuln is a super important city for a man, not just of his caliber, but for his connections as well. So he's going to be down there most winters too. So he's going to be here infrequently enough that mistakes can be made. And I quite like the idea of our colonel probably going a little bit too far. Yab says, fair. Bloke person says, fair is fair, but I do think that mixing it up a little bit is fine. Yab says, for NPCs, we probably need a regimental wizard. I agree, 1 or 2 to oversight the apprentices with a beadle, keeping order in their dormitory. I would be less keen with a beadle. Probably go for a perpetual apprentice. The Bright College has a bunch of those anyway. I'd rather go for a perpetual apprentice rather than some more mundane staff, because that's also potentially a little more story worthy. It could be a beadle who was a perpetual, who was an apprentice who failed, for example. Like we could have a little bit more in that. But yeah, I think we've got a strong tie to the Bright College, so we're going to have ourselves a wizard from the Bright College up in the main place itself. But I think we also want to have at least one wizard from another one of the orders sitting down in the main castle up in a tower too. Possibly an older one, someone who is not happy with the Bright College's imposition of what used to be his territory, probably a celestial. We may have discussed this in a previous stream. Nico then says, Andy, could you tell us more about the Holscrew family, their moves during the enemy then, or any other fluff? Yeah, I could, but I'm not going to go into too much detail in this point of the stream. As much as I'm horrified to say this, Nico, there is multiple other streams where we have discussed the family to quite a strong degree. The primary reason, though, isn't that. The primary reason is that my version of the Holscrew family is almost certainly going to divert from the published version. I've been using the Holscrews for some 20 years, so I've got a very strong idea of not just Leitmund Holscrew, but his family and their history and what they've done. And I'm quite keen to do that for my version for the Enemy Within when I present it. So what's sitting inside Empire, what do we do? Empire in Ruins, that's what we called it. Empire in Ruins, the last book for the Holscrews, is almost certainly not what I'll be doing with the Holzkrugs. But the Holzkrugs are going to be a key component of the game that I present. So their moves during the Enemy Within is going to be something that comes out in my game, I suppose. And it's going to be something that people are definitely going to see. Given that the Emperor has, let us say, some rather dodgy choices made, someone who stands as the primary opponent to the Emperor, in Altdorf, is clearly going to be an important figure for the Enemy Within in general, and for the politics of Altdorf and the Principality, or Princedom, depending on which version you use, of Altdorf, and possibly of Reikland as a whole. There's going to be several key figures, all of whom think that they should probably be the Elector Count and not Karl Franz, particularly given some of the choices that he makes during the course of the Enemy Within. So I think that just saying that alone immediately gives you a pretty strong idea of what that family may be doing. Lightman, who is almost certainly my version of him, a very, let's say, an ambitious man, a cunning man, and importantly, a clever man. He's clever enough, though, that he knows doubt. You know what they say about the best decision makers? They're the ones that don't think about them too much. So they're not necessarily the brightest folk in the world. Where some of the worst decision makers can be far too intelligent for their own good, and they reach some sort of analysis paralysis, where they're looking at all the decisions and they're like, I don't know which one is the best one. There's so many different options here, rather than just going, we need to move forward, let's do this. So yeah, Lightman is, he's a clever man, which is unfortunate sometimes for him, because it means that he won't take certain chances they might otherwise make. But that's all by the by. Let's leave that for my game when I play it and your game when you play it. But that's most certainly my version. Yalb says we probably need someone in the temple somewhere. Yes, I don't think this one will be a temple. I think this one will be a large chapel. And yeah, we definitely do. Similar to, I can't remember, Haberkorn in the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay starter set, who's in the Chapel of Sigmar there. And we added some fun little details for that chapel too. Alexander then says, and we didn't talk a lot about the female Holzkrug, who is a lot involved with the regiment. Yeah, we had a discussion about that in the previous stream as well. That, as Nico says, wasn't that in the last video? Was in the last video. And she's almost certainly going to be up in the palace, not here. So that's going to be a matter of a deeper discussion in the palace with a couple of connecting adventure hooks. Generally, the easiest way to concisely detail all the politics is not to have big long screeds going into all the politics as you describe the city and everything that's involved. Instead, it's to make it a part of the location. So we say, this is the fort, these are the people in it. One of the adventure hooks is, he has problems with the local Holzkrug woman who is causing him all manner of problems. He's not happy with this. Please, someone help him out. Go over there. You go over there, then you read the location for the palace, and she's looking for people to help her bring the local state regiment to heel, for example. And you can add all of the political shenanigans into the adventure hook, so you get an awful lot more content that's actually useful. So rather than saying, this character is doing this, and this character is doing that, and they're doing all manner of things all over the place, it's not that, because all of that's useless in your game other than trying to influence how you might use the characters. But if it's all adventure hooks, it's suddenly, I can use that one, I can use that one, I'll twist it to this and that. So I think we'll, broadly speaking, use adventure hooks rather than necessarily spend a long time describing it all out. Yal says, we talked about the current Duchess would be heavily involved with the regiment. Yes, we did. New Fellow Young, the Duchy of Blackrock is an add-on, and Uber's like, oh yeah, I'm delighted that made it, actually, because I commissioned that piece. I wasn't sure if it actually got finished. It's an Uber's Adventure. I think I actually have that somewhere, PDF perhaps. So I should go take a little check. I had a big, long discussion with the author about that one in an attempt to try and set up the Enemy Within politics that would be required. I have no idea if any of that's gone through to the final document. I should take a look. Mark Allen says, hi all. Hi, Mark. Delighted that you're here. I hope you haven't vanished already and you're still out there. Good to be with you all again. It's delightful to have you with us in this stream. Martin says, maybe just soldiers stationed in the guard towers along the bridge are prone to illness. I mean, yeah, we could do something like that. But again, I'd rather it wasn't just something random. I mean, it could literally be as simple as magic is attracted to certain shapes and forms, and it stagnates in the center. And if it stagnates in the center and causes people to fall ill, that's a really fun adventure hook. And that, I think, is worth adding in, particularly if you have an investigation from one of the wizards. So you could add it to as an adventure hook to the wizard's tower up here, where he's noted that some of the wizards are getting ill. Not the wizards, pardon me. Some of the soldiers are getting ill, far more so than they are elsewhere. Why is that occurring? What's actually happening here? And it's the very nature of the way that the place is constructed that has caused this. It shows that the Warhammer world isn't like the real world. There are certain words, there are certain shapes, there are certain forms that you should avoid. And if you don't, you can attract corruption in a variety of different and unexpected ways. One of the reasons Altdorf is so important is because it's at the center of a confluence of many, many, many ley lines. One would presume originally there would have been an elven waystone sitting right in the center there. And that equally is something that I think that actually is worth supporting. I think that makes a really good adventure hook for the Wizards tower. That's a potentially a really good idea. Martin then moves on to say, officers think they are slackers. Soldiers are growing more superstitious, going to weird and wonderful remedies to fend off impending illness. Yeah, I think that all works really quite well. Yao says, in Total War, Empire Wizards can get a Pegasus. I think, yes, they can, and they can also get one in the game. You've also got the potential of a mechanical horse, but I think I'd rather avoid that. Mechanical contraptions and the like are better left to the Gold College or someone who is perhaps an engineer. Let's not do that. A Pegasi wouldn't be beyond the realms of plausibility, but I think I'm still of the opinion, unless someone disagrees with me and comes up with a good alternative, that we don't need to worry too much about having a magical mount here. All right, Hellsgroup likes hunting exotic animals. Is there room for a larger menagerie somewhere on the outskirts of Kalegen proper? Yeah. Now, I think this is a good idea. Now, I'm going to say something relatively controversial here as I take a drink. I'm drinking green cola today, sugar-free, and also all the horrible aspartame-free as well. So, cheers. Right, so my green cola aside. My version of Castle Reiksguard is really unlike every other version of Castle Reiksguard, much like my version of Altdorf Zoo is very different. My Castle Reiksguard has got effectively a zoo attached to it, a menagerie, where many of the gifts that the Emperor has received are stored to keep them away from the capital, because some of them are proper weird. And these are gifts that he's received from ambassadors and similar. And I think, yes, to support that feel for Kalegen, that it is a center of diplomatic and ambassadorial power, having somewhere that some of the larger, weirder gifts can be kept definitely makes sense. So I think a menagerie is a good idea, and it's definitely going to be in the richer part of town. In fact, I'm going to, so I don't forget about that, quickly go up here and at the back of our palace, just write menagerie. Excellent. So we don't forget that. Now, there's not a lot of space for it there, so we might end up having to go outside the city walls. We can worry about that when we get up there. But yeah, fine idea. Yalab then says, as for Nurgle, I had the idea for a cult of Nurgle trying to infiltrate the city and desecrate what's left of the old Gyron waystone in the Halfling Enclave, as it makes the city resilient to disease. Yeah, I think that doing that is a good idea, and possibly even tying that into their awareness of the things being a bit weird around the gatehouses. We could really get a cult that is attempting to do something in the city that's perhaps slightly differently presented than most Nurgle cults. So I'd rather avoid yet another bloody doctor. I'd rather avoid yet another barber surgeon, which is always what people tend to lean to with Nurgle. Perhaps go for... I mean, the classic one's always, oh, my village is wiped out by disease, and in despair, I called out to Nurgle, and I was made whole. It would be nice to go down a different route, but I do think that having a cult of Nurgle here makes a lot of sense, particularly because of the vibrant Gyron spring that we have near the where the halflings are, and given that we also have this random little assortment, yeah, I think we should definitely do that. Possibly have it as a special location somewhere in one of the slums where they're gathering, or maybe in the upper class area, an unexpected Nurgle count. No one ever puts Nurgle in amongst the nobles. It's much like in the starter set. For those of you who know the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay starter set, there's an adventure book in it, and the adventure book gives you an adventure called Making the Rounds, I think it was called. We built that with T.S. Lookout. And after that, there's a bunch of one-page or occasionally two-page adventures, which are adventure summaries for each one of the characters in the book, and 4 other adventures on top of that you can just adapt and use as you wish. And one of those presented a Nurgle cult. And I remember when it was B Sherry, who wrote the first treatment for most of those. And B was struggling with a couple of them to try and make something really unique and interesting for each of the characters. He found the Slayer quite difficult to pin down. They also found the Elven character, Amris, a little bit tougher to pin down. So we had big, long discussions about what we could do. And I suggested an Elven Nurgle cult, which is, again, not typical. Everyone always thinks that Nurgle is for your grubby little humans grubbing away, doing their grubby little business. And it's nice to mix it up a bit. So if we can think of something that perhaps doesn't do the standard thing, but still to its core feels like Nurgle, I'm well up for that. Tied it into the hunts, kennels, and stables. Was that the... yeah, that's actually not a bad idea. That's for the menagerie. Nice idea, Martin. Yeah, then says, the rope here, I think, just an accidental red herring. We need a couple of places where shapes ties to Chaos Skaven. We can have one where it doesn't for a change. Yeah, I agree. Loosely, yeah, I agree. Next, Alexander says, maybe the regiment has a flying beast as a heraldic animal, and since the last one died a few years ago, the soldiers are quite happy, but it brings bad luck, and the heraldry animal is not present. That's a good idea, Alexander. I like that. I think that adds just that touch of character. And given that we've got the local swans, I'm probably looking at a Pegasus then, because that, again, gives you that winged white look that I think is well worth supporting. So doing that, we still haven't marked out which regiment of foot is cited here. It's Altdorf's however many regiment of foot, and Reikland's however many, Reikland's 8th regiment of foot or whatever. But that should probably be pinned down as well. I think I discussed that in a previous stream too. Apparently, I have put my own little comment there saying you should all see Discord, which of course you should do. And while I'm here, we haven't done much mapping. I'm going to have to go back to it. You've all been so discussive in the comments. Might I also say, please like the video because that makes all the difference to YouTube algorithms, apparently. And if you haven't subscribed already, do please subscribe to the channel so that you can get notifications when stuff arrives. That would be nice. And yeah, subscribe, like, do the thing. Let's move on. Yalla then says, for Weird Beasts, I had the idea with rumors of a swan-headed hippogriff that didn't end up going anywhere. Maybe we can do something with that. I'm less cool with that because it kind of looks goofy. Swan beak, in fact, swan beaks. I was busy drawing one recently. Have I got the... Oh, it's not there. I've got the bits from my... Oh, Kalegen heraldry. Is that it? Yeah, I'm starting to work on it. I've been working on the heraldry there because I need that. I'm going to have to put some heraldic animals to either side as well. I've been just clapping shield in place. Don't like the wings. They're just raggedy things that the brush made. And then I just put black lines around. But I've been doing that, and a swan head can look kind of goofy on something like a hippogriff, where birds of prey look much better. So I don't think I would be happy with that other than in art. So there might be paintings of it. There could be representations of it in the past, as in this is a creature what did exist, but currently isn't there. And I'd rather avoid the goofiness if we can. But I definitely think it should be part of the regiment. Who's in charge of Kalegen when Leitmund is away? That's a fine question. It'll have its own burgomeisters. That much is certain. There'll be a town hall. There'll be people who are responsible for dealing with that. There's also going to be minor noble bloodlines, which we haven't discussed yet. When we go and do the upper class area of the city, they're potentially going to be, there might be a local baron who's doing various stuff. That should also be included. And we also need to fully detail out the Hallscrew family bloodline, which I think we were meant to be doing today. I seem to recall I said I'd do that last stream, but we've been too busy chatting about the State Army barracks. Yalom says, based on last week's conversation, it would be his wife, the Duchess. I definitely think that she would be right up there. Would there be wizards from multiple colleges in the same regiment? Absolutely. Also, we currently have a deal between Hallscrew and the Bright College being struck about 65 years ago. That's good. That gives us more than enough time for everything to be built and organized. And I think that's a good timeline. that works really well. That also suggests it was struck by his father, which changes the nature of his father and what he was doing. There's something there to plumb in, because that's an adventure hook waiting to happen. Alexander says, Andy promised us secret streams where we get juicy bits of fluff, which his players shall not learn too early. You're actually right. I will be doing that because I'm that sort of guy. When I'm doing the streams, I'm going to be doing some chats about what's happening and why it's happening the way it is, which are going to be secret and away from my players so that they don't get to see it. We're also going to be doing one-on-one streams with some of the players. I think the first one's planned after episode 2, the Altdorf stories, where when the players arrive in Altdorf, any of you who've played anywhere, then you know you're going to pass through Altdorf pretty early. Rather than do the chase them out of town super fast thing, I'm going to give the players a little bit of time inside the city to go and do the things that they want to do. But as you will quickly find out, there's reasons that they can't stay there. Each of them has got their own reasons for why they can't or why they don't want to stay in Altdorf. And we're going to be diving into some of those stories. One of our characters is an elf. She's not going to be going into the city. She's going to be going out to the Wood Elf Enclave, the Aenir Enclave that's monitoring politics in the Empire, that's sitting down by the Amber Hills. One of my players is the daughter of the Nipponese ambassador, and she's got things to do in Altdorf. One of my players is the son of, well, the scion of House Jungfreud. And they're very much not, let's say, well accepted in the capital just now. So he's got some interesting stories that he's going to be pursuing. And they're all going to be little secret streams running about half an hour to an hour for each one of them, probably. We've also got a bright wizard. He's going to be graduating, hopefully, unless he fails his test, where he's going to be leaving Altdorf utterly dejected. He seems to presume he's going to pass them all, but we'll actually find out. I've got a document for bright wizards about all the keys that they collect and what they have to do to get each of the keys to finish off their apprenticeship or their journeying apprenticeship, depending on where they are. So that's something that we're doing. Nico says, oh boy, can't wait. I'm delighted that you say that. I'm looking forward to it immensely. Even if it's just me and my players and we're the only ones that watch it, we're going to have all the fun in the world. We are literally going to be streaming it from my living room next door. It's going to be a thing. Andy, with your response, I know everything I need to expand the role of Hosgrove. Delighted. In my event to make him another option for my team instead of Tollbringer. Thank you, Andy. Yeah, Nico, just to add a little bit to that, it's going to be a lot more than just Toddbringer versus the Emperor, so to speak, in my version of the Enemy Within. Each one of the, literally, each one of the Grand Provinces has got its own internal politics and its own elector count or countess. And each of those are going to be bringing something to the table. And that's going to be, I think, a fascinating part of it. This says the whole thing about the Duchy of Blackrock in Numbers 2 is 32 pages. I'm delighted, including a calendarium and a map of the Duchy and 4 pages on ties between Ubersreich and the Enemy Within. Oh, super pleased. I'm definitely going to have a look at that. On the idea of Pegasi, says the bloke person, could they have been pilfered from Bretonia as little foals, causing them to have to hide away every time Bretonian noble comes through? I mean, you could. The reason that I slightly rubbish that idea, and I apologize if it comes off as dismissive, is that Pegasi are about in the Warhammer world. There are a number of wild, herds? Is that the right term? Flocks, flirds of Pegasi down in the Grey Mountains, many of which are perhaps escapees from Couronne. And then you've got to remember that not too far away from that, you've got the Wood Elves, and they have a whole mountain area dedicated to the creatures, many of which have spread out. There are multiple places in the Empire where you can potentially get hold of a Pegasus. So I don't think they would necessarily have to hide them. I mean, how could they identify one over the other? Pilfering doesn't feel very Halskrug. Halskrug would buy or expect it to be gifted to him. He's not the sort to lower himself to stealing, and he certainly wouldn't accept it if his regiment had been involved with such things. Got to remember, all these people are nobles, and there's a certain acceptable thing here. And for Holzkrug, this would be unacceptable. Other noble lines, not a problem at all. If we're taking, for example, the Trots. The Trots are all up for stealing. They're from Tame, a little bit further south than here. They pretty much nick anything, or indeed buy anything. Compare that with, say, the, I don't know. You got the Tellins not too far away. They're just over the border over on the other side. Tellins, they're super, super rich, largely because the current Duke of Telland captured as prizes like about, I don't know, 50 ships or something. And he started to repurpose the entirety of his lands with all manner of cool canals. Take that in comparison to, say, House Schnittel. House Schnittel are an ancient family that's fallen on very hard times and most certainly would not be beyond stealing something. Anyway, Huron says, Nurgle cult in the upper class area that's inspired by wordsmith like romantic poetry, rich wastrels reflecting and the pointlessness of existence when compared to the enormity of existence. I quite like that, Heron. Yeah. A bunch of youths who have perhaps gone a little bit too far. All we need to do is you need that instigating moment when they go too far. What has moved them from being a bunch of indolent young nobles to being potential cultists? We, at various points in various books, way back to, for example, A Total Corruption, that was written by Rob, and I did a massive treatment on that book for him. But your cultists need to have a reason for why they're cultists, much like when we did, say, the Circle of Flesh and the starter set, and how exactly they present. Who are they? Why are they there? How did they become what they are? What is the slow, subtle steps that have led to their corruption? I love the idea. We just need to make it real, which generally means who's the individuals involved. And we can probably get there when we do our Rich Quarter. I had my players face a cabal of Wood Elf Nurgle cultists. I approve, working together with some Nurglite beastmen to spread diseases in rural Middenland, loosely based on that idea in the starter. It's superb. That I can't express, Yalab, how happy that makes me, because one of the joys of creating material that other people use is seeing it not just being used as written, but inspiring people to take it on to something new and interesting that we may never have considered. And the core point of that one was wood elves can fall to chaos as well. And how would that express? Because they don't mutate, it's a completely different kettle of fish for them. It's, as I've mentioned in previous streams, it's very much a choice for wood elves and exactly how they get there. Anyway, Martin says, sorry about my split comments, Andy. It happens. YouTube hates my longer attempts, but let me edit them. It happens. And Yab says, it's exactly my type of goofy, to be honest. Some people like buckets. I like swan-headed griffins. We all like different stuff. Yellow says, 65 years could make Lightman's father a relatively young man or grandfather closer to his death, depending on what would be more interesting. Yeah, I agree. I've got an old bloodline for the Holzkrugs that was for my own game that I didn't use when I was writing Holzkrug material or passing Holzkrug material to others, because it was my own personal stuff. So it's not when I'm giving stuff to other people when they're writing for the official game, I'm not going to give them my own home game stuff, but I'm going to go plumb that and take a check, because I'm pretty sure I had something in there that might be useful. Lyman's father, the family connection being a link between the Bright College and the Holzkrug. Yeah, definitely. We need something in that. Man comes out with 30 pages of Imperial slang, but doesn't know the collective noun for Pegasi. Yeah. Go figure. Yeah, for the young cult Nurgle, maybe seeing that even man such as Lightman, with all his wealth, can't maintain Kalegen as that awesome city he devised in all its ugliness, is what pushed them over the line. Yeah, possibly, but we still need to have that point where they whisper, the dark gods whisper to them, and they actually listen. What turns them into cultists, and what is this a cult that's trying to do something, and what do they do if something comes out of the forest or a proper cultist arrives and he's all mutated and whatever, and has expectations and demands of them? And that could be the adventure hook. The adventure hook is the cultists are petrified because a completely different cultist, a proper Nurgle diseasey, fly-ridden hellhole of a pus-ridden, boil pustule creature is now making demands of them, and they are not interested in this at all. They are very much interested in a very different manifestation of how Nurgle could present, and they want that creature offed. And that could be a fun little adventure hook to show how cultists aren't just bad guys, they're people too. There's one little last point there. If you pull out Hosco Heraldic Tree, that invalidates half the timeline we worked out. Yeah, let's not do that. Right, so let's start doing our shades. We haven't really added anything to our State Army Barracks. All we managed to do was talk for about 3/4 of an hour about loads of other cool stuff. I'm going to pop in the primary shades onto this, which will hopefully start to give it a little bit of shape. That's a tower, so I've already messed up. I want to have a different brush. Don't like this one. Not for doing shades. That'll be better. Yeah, that's a bit better. Right, so the entirety of the underside is obviously going to be in shade, ranging from about there. So let's pop that into the shade for the moment. And the light's coming from the top side. As we've discussed multiple times, we know that that's not actually likely. In fact, it's impossible. Whatever. Let's drop that like so. Okay. Now let's take a look at each one of the buildings up here. That's going to completely cover the gardens in shadow. Like so. We've got our main towers and such like, which will affect stuff, but we'll get onto that after. Now, as I've mentioned multiple times, we don't worry too much about the shades being 100% accurate. The reasons for that were covered inside the tutorial that I did. The goal here is to provide an idea of where the light's hitting, where the shadows lie, not to get it perfect. After all, now this is moving uphill. The shadow here will be shorter. There we go. And it is moving uphill. Shade there. Big Wizard's Tower. Going up to the wall and crossing. Okay, so once I've done the highlights and shades in this, as I said, I'm going to go over to the old Garden of Moor. If you have any ideas for that, do drop them in. Our Garden of Moor, though, is not, it's the old one. It's no longer used by anyone probably other than the ruling families, local nobles and similar. It's probably not used by the Holzkrugs, who will be using their own crypts back in their ancestral seat. This is not their ancestral seat, so to speak. This is a new city that has sprung up for reasons that we have discussed in multiple streams now. Okay. A tall tower. Rock. Building. Okay. Right, so this one's coming down here. That bit's higher, so that bit goes like so. That'll have a shadow on that side. That bit's higher, that goes up higher, so that bit's in shadow. And the shadow comes off from the tower and crosses over. That's a dip, so that goes up higher. We're up higher again, going up to higher there. So the shadow's sitting like that. Tower, crossover. I won't put too much on here because we're going to draw in that area yet. Right, let's check our castle. Wow, my hand is aching. I do not recommend streaming a map after building a table all day. It freaking sucks. No, I don't want that. Get out of the way. What am I doing? Here we go. All right. That goes that way. That goes that way. Shades there. It's going downhill. That's going downhill. Got a wall here. That caused a shadow there. Wall here. Here. Okay, dropping a few shadows on the rock as well. I'll color that in later. Not too much on this because that's for later too. Okay, cool. A little bit of the base just to give the idea that the base is darker and it's rising up out of the water and the surrounding land. Alrighty, there's some pretty basic shadows in place. I'm now ready to go and do some highlights. I'm not going to do the big shadow down here. I will do that later when we do the actual surrounding geography. We'll just worry about what's sitting on the rock itself just now. So I'm moving on to the highlights. And once I've done the highlights, I'm going to move over to the comments again, and we can pick any of that out. Shade the other side of that. As with the shades, the highlights are all very just simple, scrapey little lines. Also catch some of the shadows that I accidentally missed, entirely on purpose, obviously. That's a tall tower. And we have missed the shades in that entirely. Back to the highlights again. So yeah, a Temple of More. We've got some things that we can pop in that if we wish to do so. Whoa, wrong. Well, Garden of More around the temple. Is there an old temple there? Is this where a doomsayer used to work from? Or is that not the case? If anyone has any ideas for that, do drop them in the comments. I'll get to those in just a moment. There's far too many freaking highlights to do on this. But we're getting there. Slowly but surely. Statues. No, I'm doing this a little bit too quickly. That's because I don't want to spend too long doing this during the stream. This is not the most exciting thing to be doing. But we are getting there. Okay, tall tower for the wizards. Love it. Okay. Right, let's have a quick check at the comments before I finish off doing these bits. Right, where was the last part? Ooh. Here we go. Yellup says, if you pull out, hold on, no, we just had that one. Martin says, there was a thing back in the days of tuberculosis, a pale skin, blue-lipped appearance being attractive. Yes, there was. That might be something that we could pull on for our nice little cult of nobles. Maybe they were fascinated, says Alexander, by the life of the poor and how they managed with all the hardships, starving, sickness, violence, etc. As some of them did study medicine in Altdorf, and they were especially fascinated by sicknesses. They're deliberately spreading sickness across the line. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier in the stream, I would like to avoid going down the classic, they studied sickness, they were doctors, stroke, barber surgeons, stroke, sick people, because everybody's done it before and it won't add anything new to the oeuvre, to our work. We're looking to try and inspire with what we're creating here, to do some things that other people will go, oh, I hadn't thought of doing it that way before, but that works, that matches what Warhammer is. And I think that's what I would rather do, rather than do yet another cult of doctors. And he mentioned you want to stay away from the medical theme for the cult. Yeah, I did, as mentioned. Esty then suggests for Nurgle, thanks for getting ahead of me, we could have them as the beautifier with Slaanesh's perfection. Nurgle could be acceptance of your beauty, so that the cult wouldn't be about showing off, but not in this is the epitome of beauty way. Since the whole city is a vanity project, the young nobles have grown very disillusioned by this path towards perfection, this push towards perfection. Wait, you've got another comment. Before I discuss this, I'll read your other comments. That is bound to fail. They've decided that the collapse of this project is more beautiful than any pre-planned city that they could have had. So they could do things to sabotage the city planning. Huh. See, now I quite like some of that. I don't like one part of it, which is the suggestion that Slaanesh is perfection. Slaanesh most certainly isn't perfection. You could argue that, but I think the argument would ultimately be flawed. Slaanesh is all about striving potentially for perfection and never being satisfied. You could argue that. It's about indulgence and going too far. You could certainly argue that. But perfection, no, not quite. But I'm really quite liking this idea of acceptance, and the pressure that they're under to constantly do things to make the Duke appear better. And that pressure will be coming from their peers, from their parents, and they're done with it. And now they're working to try and just bring it all to a halt. You know, just live with what you've got. Yeah, I think there's definitely something in that. Definitely something in that. I think that's a really good idea, Esty. Yeah, defo. I think that should definitely be a part of that group. Heron says it could stick to the theme of art. The feeling of insignificance evolves into a fascination with entropy. They begin to see beauty in the broken down buildings and streets. Lightman's pursuit of vanity runs in opposition to this. This leads him to sabotaging projects behind the scenes. See, yeah, I definitely think we've got something working here. There is a beauty in decay. And I think that that is something that Nurgle is very much in support of. That richness of overplump life. Yeah, that pops and bursts and becomes something new and interesting. Yeah, I think there's definitely something in that. I think you can build quite an interesting philosophy out of this. And if we're doing that, though, we probably want to not just have it be a new thing. This needs to be something that's got a little bit of age to it, because it's got a bit of age in its philosophy. And it feels like definitely there's something here. I'm not sure what it is. Yelp says, for this garden of more, we talked about some larger grave sarcophagi for historical officers in the fort. Yeah, that makes sense. And possibly important persons from the village, at least priests. Besides that, standard graves. We also mentioned that there would be black roses growing there, definitely. If that's something we want to reflect in the map, it probably isn't, because tiny amounts of vegetation like that rarely look good on a map of this scale. Heron then moves back to Nurgle. Then a possibly turns up and they have a big problem. Yes, they absolutely do. That's why I was kind of digging it. They see substance and depth in the ugliness of decay, whereas the beautification is hollow. Yeah, I definitely think we have something there. As the Nurgle cult, I think we have a thematic base multi worked out. Now we need some specific, possibly dramatic event that be a catalyst. I agree on whether that's somebody coming in and instructing the youth on a better way of living. So perhaps being the source of the philosophy that they are all pursuing. Someone who himself is perhaps studied at the University of Altdorf, has perhaps studied a few arcane tomes, and then is quite liking the idea of being the center of attention. These young folks, that could be one way, or alternatively, it could be something that the young folks themselves have come to. There's definitely something in there. I feel like there's a tantalizing catalyst, as you say, just sitting there beyond my reach. Martin says, centerpiece of the old Garden of Moor, a burial chamber of ancient construction, its entrance lining up with a solstice event. Always fun. A good solstice burial chamber. Heron says, I like the idea of slow burn. Feels thematic for Nurgle. Yes, it does. SD says, goth nobles leading angsty poetry about entropy at parties in a decrepit building. I love it. I love it. I think it's great. The more that we're discussing this, the more I think we're definitely getting something. Yalb says the garden can have proper ancient elements. It's been re-sanctified almost 140 years back in place of an older, abandoned one. Yeah, I think that's quite a good idea too. Yalb says, I always hated the sorrows of young Werther, but it seems kind of fun here. Yeah, it does seem a little bit fun here. I'm quite enjoying where it's going. The bloke person says, speaking of the roses in the Gardens of Moor, are they purple roses like the ones in Mousselon, or are these ones special? Yeah, the Gardens of Moor are renowned for their black roses. Now, in the real world, that would be super special. But this isn't the real world. This is the warmer world. And in the warmer world, black roses are known for growing thickly in old sanctified Gardens of Moor. The many different flowers that grow in Moor's garden are pretty much summed up with black roses. And black roses are a symbol of the cult as a whole. There's even an order of the black rose. There's a black rose knightly order as well. There's black roses all over the place. And they grow in most of the temples. So yeah, black roses. They're not purple, they're black. Blackity black, blackface. That did not sound good. Yalb says, also having those all youngish nobles falling to Nurgle, being later visited by a proper Nurgle cultist that came here to desecrate the Waystone, could put them quite on edge. I agree it would. I think we want them to be actually, we want them to actually be a cult at that point, so they want something earlier that actually turns them. Yeah, I agree. We want them to be a cult, and we want to show the disunity in the various cults that you will find across the Empire. It's very easy to think of chaos as, well, at each other's throats, often as separate powers, as in the Nurgle cultists hate the Tzeentch cultists or whatever. But it's often the Tzeentch cultists hate the Tzeentch cultists. They all have different views on how things should come to pass. And it's not until a great incursion of chaos comes and magic waxes like crazy and the world is again put on the brink that these cultists properly fall. Many of them are dabblers, particularly when you look at, say, the cult of Slaanesh, which is almost akin to the cult of name any other god in the Empire when you look at the nobility. Many of the nobles don't necessarily outrightly worship Slaanesh, but are pretty much hand in hand with someone who does. And that's something that can cause massive problems when a great incursion of chaos comes. Yeah, moves back to the Nurgle things. It says they do the angsty thing, maybe sabotage Lightmount here and there, write their dark reactionary poetry, and possibly hang out in that rookery we have in Sawyer's Town. I love it. The bloke person says, could they be more of a book club than a traditional robes in the cellar cult? Yes, they absolutely could. A book and poetry club. I think they're relatively academic. I can see the cult leader with a pair of spectacles, a high forehead, maybe hair piled up, split up into a twin comet to try and give him that sort of air of respectability, whilst in truth, he is preaching about what is effectively the end of the world. One thing to remember for the modern Warhammer setting is that it is at a 5 minutes to midnight position. I say modern because I'm not saying, say, the age of heroes or the old world, which is going to be set a good 200 years or so in the past. But in this one, it is 5 minutes to midnight. The world is coming to an end. Now, you might not want your world to come to an end because you want to play in it, but the general tone of it is doom, gloom, the world's coming to an end. And many of the cultists have come to accept this. And I think that that works quite well for this particular cult. They are a group that believe the world is coming to an end, and that they should take, they should accept the world as it is, and it's coming to an end. Yeah, I think there's definitely something in that, and it also sets up the fact that the world is coming to an end potentially. Anyway, when suddenly a pus-ridden maggot infested, handing a stick with a tentacle, Nurgle Warlock shows up, desecrate the Waystone, and reaches out to them. The Death Poet Society kind of thing. Yeah, it kind of is. Yeah. Although it's getting a little bit close to the death card. Right, where did I put my pen? I can't draw anything without my pen. Let's finish this off because we've done altogether too much talking and not enough mapping here. I'm going to zoom out and decide whether I want to do any more shadows on that and whether I want to color my rocks. I think I probably do. So I think I've got an undercolor. Let's quickly pop that into there. Let's see. That's just making it look a little bit darker because of the... I'm not sure I like that. I'll sort that afterwards because I'd like... Yeah. Let's just pop in a few bits. I'm pretty happy actually with our little fort. We've got ourselves something that feels really kind of cool. Right, let's go do our old Garden of Moor. I'll finish off all of the rising rock and the pools and similar around it when we do some more of the geography outside the city walls. So that's probably going to be a good 10 streams away before we do that one. So up here now, there's a couple of things to mention about the old temple, the old Garden of Moor. This is the Garden of Moor that used to service the old village before it started becoming a city. And I'm going to mark out these areas so they can be seen nice and cleanly when we do it. So that's the old village here. And the old village has got a path that used to run up to the old Garden of Moor. That path has been interrupted by the new palace that got built. So the old road is still there in part. It's got its remnants over the old palace grounds, and it moves into the temple grounds there. We also have a direct route going from the State Army Barracks, because the State Army Barracks, whenever they suffered any great losses, they would obviously be interred over in the Garden of Moor. And when the city massively increased, that Garden of Moor was no longer big enough. So a new Garden of Moor was sanctified on the outside of the city. And that's now the working Garden of Moor where the temple is, and it has an actual temple. This one here probably doesn't have a temple. It probably doesn't even have a chapel. I imagine that any who died were held in storage, whatever it is they decided to hold them, possibly in a special building over by the old garden. And when wandering priests of Moor came by, they did the necessary ceremonies, placed the coins on the eyes and sent them off towards Moor's realm through the portal. And we can support that by possibly having a small cottage or a small manse where wandering priests of Moor were allowed to stay. It's now probably fallen into disrepair. To show that it was servicing the local State Army Barracks, we probably want to have some form of memorial there, some sort of cenotaph suggesting a war from the past that their regiment was involved with, perhaps the arrival of Grom, perhaps some other war in the past. There has been multiple examples of wars down through the ages that we could pull from. This is the Princedom of Reikland, so you'd be looking at possibly supporting the... Did I just drop my pen on the floor? I did, pardon me. So we might want to consider supporting the Altdorf wars in the past. Altdorf, for example, has skull heraldry attached to it because of the successes during the Vampire Wars. And possibly the local regiment was there during some of those wars too. So we can potentially have multiple cenotaphs from previous wars. This is, after all, Warhammer. So there's absolutely no reason not to support that. So maybe we have ourselves a bank of cenotaphs for important battles that have happened in the past. Some of them held inside small mortuaries that you can tour around. It's old. It's all wrapped around with roses and ivy. And whilst it's tended to maintain that almost ancient air, so that when someone is taken to tour around it, a visiting dignitary, for example, they can feel like they're walking into something old. They're stepping into the past, and they're seeing the many past victories that the local regiment has been involved with, or indeed its great defeats too. And some of the older stones can be completely collapsed. At least that's a good start for how that could go. I don't think the entire area is all that big. We're probably talking about, I don't know, about 50 meters in a triangle or something like that. Let's have a look at our scale. We can have a look and get the actual space that we've got. So show, please. Where's my extras there? Okay, yeah, so that would be about because our map's marked in yards, isn't it? So that would be about 50, 60 yards. So that's big enough. We can get ourselves a bunch of sepulchres in there. We can get ourselves some tangly old weeds. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. I'm going to go down through the comments, see if anyone's added anything to it beyond my monologue that I just had there. The bloke person says maybe they get a hold of something from the north that has been rewritten as a piece of fiction to disguise it, and they've been reading it, merrily corrupting their souls. So there is something that's potentially worth supporting here, and that's going contrary to my previous discussion concerning our medical dudes. And that's that Altdorf falls to Nurgle. If you go by the official end of the world, Dr. Festus, I think it is, comes in with his dodgy army and brings the whole place down. And the corruption from within is a part of that. So supporting that is important. We started doing that in the starter set. And he was a character who was responsible for one of the Nurgle cults in there that was attached to the local Physicians Guild. So perhaps he's a Nordlander. Nordlander who has plans. So I can see him potentially being responsible for supplying them with the necessary literature for them to tip over that edge. So there's definitely something there. And given that we are so close to Altdorf, reinforcing that story is probably a good thing. Yab says a teacher brought from afar drops some revolutionary ideology, then gets himself executed, but his ideas taint their minds and end up pushing them towards Nurgle. We could do that with a Nordlander, for example, who was a student of Dr. Festus. That would work. Yalb says perhaps his execution being a catalyst we've been looking for. Yes, perhaps his execution is exactly that. Maybe we could have an old our cellars near the old garden where corpses were held until traveling priests shows up alongside the small cottage. I think that's a pretty good idea. Somewhere that's down underground and the natural coolness of the earth will hopefully stop the bodies rotting too much before the doomsayer arrives and can do the necessary rituals. Martin then says, for all these words, the old graveyard is feeling small. It's not that small. It's a relatively large space. It may look small on the greater map, but it's a big enough space that I think that we can get it all in without too much difficulty. Martin says, would it be inside the new walls or just on the outside leading it to the... It's definitely on the inside of the walls because the preference would have been to contain that and hold it. It's also inside the grounds. It's naturally going to sit and lie within the area. It's going to be sitting at the base of a cliff, probably, where it naturally lies and where we've placed it. It's part of the city. I think definitely in the inside would be better. And I don't want it to connect directly through to the old one because it's always good to have people have to go all the long way around because that then forces PCs to look at other locations as they pass by. So if they do want to go from the old to the new garden or from the new to the old garden, they'll have to pass by palaces, potentially meet NPCs who are going to cause them problems. That's much more fun than having a direct road. SD says maybe the teacher wrote a poem, the old grandfather, that pushes this viewpoint of acceptance, and they read it at every meeting without realizing at first they were praying to Papa Nurgle. Good old Papa Nurgle. Not against the idea. Like it, SD. Maybe a death gate, a ceremonial path out of the city through the old grave mounds of fallen to the new graveyard. I'm not keen on putting a gate there purely because each gate is a weakness in the walls. But the Cult of Moor would have petitioned for it. Give me a moment while I have a little think on this and see what I think. And I'm going to go against myself and agree with you. I think that's actually a better idea. Particularly because we can also use that as a potential adventure hook. The gate is always shut because we could actually have a fundamentalist Morian. Moor's portal is always open. That is pretty much a core Morian belief. And we can have ourselves a gate that is fashioned like a portal of Moor, and our fundamentalist Morian is not happy about the fact that it's shut. And that can cause some problems when, I don't know, some beastmen or some raggedy old brigands or something make their way into the city. There's definitely an adventure hook in that. And it's not often that we get an opportunity to look at hardline Morians. What does a fundamentalist Morian look like? What sort of problems can they cause? And here's one example of a problem that they could cause. A gate that needs to be shut must be opened. Yalab says perhaps some obelisk there to commemorate troops of the regiments lost in various wars. That's what I meant by a cenotaph earlier. Away from the city. Yes, I agree. That is something that would fit the smaller space. And no, I completely agree. Yalab says, I think we want the old garden to stay within the new wall. I agree, we do. Would they, though? That's perfectly serviceable right. There is perfectly serviceable right to the side. Not sure what you're saying, a perfectly serviceable gate. There is, but the gate's some distance away. It's all the way over here, which is a good, when you're moving around the palace, actually an awkward distance away, which I quite like, as I mentioned previously. Alexander then suggests, doesn't need to be a full-fledged gate, but a postern. Yeah, that's equally fair. Fashioned as a portal of more, potentially heavy defended. Yeah, I like that. Okay, let's start thinking about how to present this place. First job is get rid of my more old garden line. Get rid of that. Scrape, 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 scrape. Let's mark out its general delineations. We're looking for relatively large. Let's get my, I can barely see my scale, but that there is a 10-yard block for a 100-yard block, which is that size. Okay, so we're talking like, what, 80 meters off the top of my head. Okay, so that's the size. That's a pretty sizable area that we've got to work with here. Let's wall it off. Old decrepit walls covered in old roses. At this end, it's a rough cliff that leads to possibly what we have is a cave where the bodies used to be stored. So you'd make your way into the cave. Bodies were held in there, mourning and wassailing and similar. Okay, so we've got a cliff edge there. We've got the new city walls, which are here. Possibly, because it was most convenient, that cuts over some of the old sepulchres, so they're on the other side. Practicality getting in the way of that. That will go down very poorly with some. I like it. We have our small gate sitting about there. We'll have a major arch leading in, a more impressive arch there. Crumbly old walls. Games Workshop's Forge World made some really nice resin scenery, actually, that I'm imagining in my head for the Garden of More. I know it was nice because I bought it and I liked it and I used it in a variety of games. So we've got ourselves a gate for our poorer folk, a gate for the richer folk coming in there. And this is our Garden of More area. Let's perhaps have it raise up slightly there. We're going to need our cottage, which we can have sitting there. It's small ground, probably tended by some sort of sexton, pardon me, not sextant, that's a completely different thing. A sexton who's employed from the local village. That leads into there, and that gives us lots of opportunities for various types of building in here. Now we're going to want to have at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I mean, quite a few, and then a bunch of. So we want to have our poor man's lot off to the side. Its own little gate and unmarked graves. I'll keep this all very loose on detail. And that will be probably full. And a central area here for your average citizenry. So I'm going to mark in a couple of larger sepulchres. then we have portal stones all over the place, raven stones, Moore's cawing ravens. We want to have ourselves some sort of old tree sitting in the center, dead. And while I'm doing that, I know I'm going off all the way to embark, but I forgot to put in any vegetation on this part, so I'm going to do it now so that I don't forget it, because I almost certainly will. Let's quickly pop that in now. Again, if you want to know how the hell I'm doing this, I did a tutorial, blah, 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 blah. In fact, I'm about to do another tutorial. I'm going to be posting that up at the weekend. And there's already been a suggestion that the tutorial should be related to what we're building here so that we can actually use it. And I'm not necessarily against that. If anyone's got any ideas for what I should do my next tutorial on, now's the time to just pop it in the comments, because I'll probably pay attention to it. But I'm going to be doing that over on the Inside the Rookery Patreon for all of the patrons there. And quite looking forward to that. The last one was a digital data slatey Fallouty style map that was quite fun to put together. Let's have a little bit growing on the edges as well, just so we've got that in place. Actually, talking about B pinged me recently and said that they'd be willing to drop in on one of our streams so we can talk about some of the stuff what we did do. Let me just double check if what B said. Wednesday, first, second, maybe not next one, but the one after that. And there we go. I also got a ping from the person that said they'd like to help out with writing. I apologize for completely losing track of where that mail was. Right, anyway, let's get back to what we were doing. Let's quickly drop in a couple of trees on this, because we've got the Duchess's garden there. Right, and let's get back to that garden more. That's enough for me to get a feel for the place anyway. I'll do more to this later. Right, back to this garden more. Let's start filling some lines. One brush. Right brush. Right. So if most of my graves are there, we're going to have a main road that goes through there. Let's put our roads on first so we decide our space. Oops. Roads. We have one that's going through that way, one that leads through to the garden, little manse, like so. There had been the old path that led through to the outside of the town. Moved up there, which gives us a natural angle to play with there. Turn that round. One moving over that way, one moving around the edges, and up there, up onto the hill, where there's going to be a nice big one there for some local colonel or another. Okay, that's beginning to make sense in my head. Okay, I think I can see how that all works. Right, before I quickly fill this all in, let's see if there's any other comments. There's a few. Yelp says, how about that old cottage and corpse holding earth cellars ending up outside the wall, and the subtle smell of death decay still permeating them, causing bands of ghouls to come there sometimes. Yeah, possibly. I like it being stuck on the inside, though, as in where I've just put it, because I can feel the stories that would bring. There's a part of me that sort of wants that tunnel to go somewhere on the inside nowadays as well. But that could be because we've got a gate. If we didn't have a gate, I would be inclined to do that, because I'd be inclined to put it out over here and have the tunnels go in through the rock and possibly squirrel their way up to a location on the inside of town. But because we have a gate, there's no need to have our secret passage into town here. So I would rather it was here, and that possibly it is a route out by various folks, and possibly our Nurgle cultists, who can creep out, make their way out through the old chapel that's now largely abandoned. Nobody's really looking after it anymore. And this old garden can potentially be our Nurgle cultists, one of their haunts, perhaps. So was there anything else that you said there? I quite like the idea of our ghouls, though, being caught up, although these are old corpses. I perhaps want to use the ghouls as because the new Garden of Moor is on the outside of town and isn't behind the walls. We can use ghouls as an adventure hook there very easily indeed, because it's not properly protected. It's only got the walls that the garden itself has. And it will have actual fresh dead, which will attract them. And I think that might work better than doing it with the old garden. As if it was placed slightly in the side and then the new walls were erected, but they didn't care to keep that inside. Yeah, I get that idea, but I think I'd rather just have a sepulchre or two on the outside there. Probably. Don't quote me on that. I might change my mind if you come up with a better idea. Northern Road used to lead to the village, but was recently cut off when the palace was built. Yeah, I agree. Totally. I think it is. Low person says, do we need anyone to guard the garden just to keep an eye on it, just in case any local vampires are aggressive? Yeah, there'll probably be a grave warden. The grave warden will be responsible for sort of tending the place and making sure that it doesn't go wild. They will be paid for by the Temple of Moor to the north. They won't live there. They will be probably responsible for ensuring that grave robbers don't grave rob, and for ensuring that on various awful days, like say Hex and Stag, that things don't go awry, that local necromancers don't use the Moore's Leap's going to be full tonight opportunity to raise some nasty undead thing from here, or just grab some corpses. So yeah, I reckon there'll definitely be something, and that could be a fun NPC there. There'll be a permanent Moor clergy in the new garden to the north. Yes, definitely. I don't think anyone would be here all the time. I agree, not all the time, but there'll definitely be grave wardens that are sent down here from there. Yeah, then says, as for next tutorial masterclass, I suggest doing Kalegen Castle 4 plans as a possible idea. Yes, you did, and that's not a bad idea. Unless the, Martin says, unless the more extremist cleric and more see it as their personal duty and has become isolated from the new garden. Yeah, possibly. I mean, we could have ourselves some sort of Morian monkey fellow who's very interested in keeping that gate open and doing various other things that the locals don't like. But I don't think necessarily residing here is good, because I think having it open to the cultists of Nurgle to use to pass through is more interesting as a story. And if we have ourselves permanent people ensconced here, they'll no longer be able to use that. And it is very close to the noble ground up above. So having that decay, the old Garden of Moor, being part of their repertoire of tools that we can use for them to use, I think makes it a bit better. Yeah, then says, I didn't imagine the earth cellars as tunnels, neither did I to begin with. Just partial dugouts covered with stones, neither did I, but I think I quite like the idea of an old cave system being purposely used for that, because they tend to be cool, and we've got ourselves crags in the area, so I see no reason not to use that. Yalvin says, I guess I'm going to drop a link in Discord. That sounds like a good idea. If you don't know, if you've got any ideas, because YouTube doesn't particularly like anyone posting links other than me, just pop them over in Discord and do the linking over there. If I quickly take a check to see if you did post that link, I'm going to go check now. Kalegen channel. Yeah, I see exactly what you're saying. So Yalab has just, if I can get a post link, copy message link, I'm going to pop it up as a link in the comments. So if you want to connect through to it, you can. Okay, so that's the link directly into Discord. That should take you to it. I'll bring it up on screen as well if anyone really wants to type in all those numbers. And I think that we possibly could have some of that. See, I like that because it's got flavor. Would I prefer that, or would I? You know what? Why don't we do that for the new Temple of Moor? It's got a large temple, but there's a fundamentalist who's wanting to keep to the old ways. And they've built themselves old earthen mounds for storing dead like that, because I think they're an interesting location that we could potentially use. I still think I prefer the cave because of the story potentials for this one, but again, happy to be overruled if anyone else has an alternative idea there. I have lost track of where we were in the comments. Do we need anyone to guard? There we go. Of the next tutorial, imagine Earth's tunnels. Yes, you did. Well, you then said that. And then Esty says some mausoleums could have been dug into the cliff, and someone has dug tunnels. Oh yeah, good idea. Let's grab some mausoleums directly into that cliff as well. Didn't even consider that. Feel like an idiot. Yes, definitely good idea. That also means that we can have the mausoleums potentially go in much deeper and underneath the stone as well. So I don't need to draw it just now. And we can assume that the old Garden of Moor is bigger than it might initially appear. And we can also potentially have some interesting things now living down there. That could be fun. Didn't find a satisfying link, but place picks in the new Kalegen topic. And yes, I've linked to those. It was great. And then Yab says, would the new temple need earth cellars for holding corpses at the new garden? Wouldn't they just bury them immediately? Well, no, there's all manner of rituals that need to be placed. Most people don't get buried for days because there's a certain amount of time where you need to give everyone an opportunity to come and say goodbye to the recently departed. There's rituals that have to be done with coins and all the rest of it. Then you've got your funeral to do. It's not a matter of they just get buried immediately. They're normally not buried for a good week or so. So places to store the dead, either for our old fundamentalist who's got his old version of doing it, or alternatively them held inside the temple itself, I think that works quite well. Cool. Okay, let's finish off this area. So we've got it all in place. Right, let's take that comment off. Okay, so if we're going to be building out some of the mausoleums from the rock, let's give that impression with some there. We can also have the stone moving as we then move up and it starts to climb. We need a natural place for us to go up. There's a reason this has gone straight, which suggests that the rock outcrop backs off here. Now the wall's going around the base. So yeah, that'll do. That'll work. Let's mark that. Now, as I've mentioned multiple times, our lines do not need to be straight. They do not need to be pretty. Our goal here, our goal here, as I said, is to create something that's got a bit of character. And that does not necessarily mean straight lines everywhere. So we've got, this is going to be general graveyard. This is going to be the same. This is going to be a couple of standing and then lots of smaller. Okay, so where's our squares? So that's, heck, you can get like 15, 20 graves in each one of these. Now, I could go into detail here, but I'm not going to. I'm going to leave most of these as just small dotty bits to give the idea, the impression that this is a place that's full of lots of gravestones, larger areas, bigger sepulchres. Some of them will have effigies of more. Now, I want the idea of the soldiers coming in here. So if we have a host of established ones up to a larger mausoleum at the top. Although it's obviously not for mausolus, so strictly speaking, it's not a mausoleum. So there's going to be some, no, wrong way around. Like this. And then space around there. That would have been an old pathway that went there, so there'll be some on the other side as well. We'll draw those afterwards when we do the outside part of the town. We're marking a couple of our roads. Let's also get rid of that district color so we don't get caught up with this purple nonsense. Paupers. Okay. Okay, I'm getting a very strong feel for what this place is like now. We've got gravestones sort of regimentedly placed down, some larger sepulchres. Some of these will be given over to cenotaphs and war memorials. Graves for the servants, leading off towards the edge by the nobles. Love it. These can follow the contours. Okay. Before I start turning this into what looks like a slightly more finished version, check the comments again, see if there's anything worth picking out and adding from those, and then we can start finishing off this, adding some shades, highlights, a little bit of green for our grassy areas, overgrow it with a little bit of wildness, dropping a couple of purple locations in here for places we will detail out. Do I need anything else? No, we don't need a labourer's cottage or anything like that. I think that's most of the stuff we need. Right, let's go check the comments. Right. Alexander says, if we had an attempt of sewerage for the noble houses on the hill, there could even be a connection to the tunnels of the crypts, ghouls invading noble houses on occasion. How are the ghouls going to get in to do that, though, given that we're currently assuming they're on the outside? But, yeah, potentially. We've got some sepulchres here which could connect to almost anything, I suppose. Yeah, there's definitely something in that, although I think we already mentioned that the place probably doesn't have sewers but we could have sewers up in the upper class area, at least the establishment of them. Could there be a watchtower where the cliffs connect to the city wall? Seems a good vantage point. I agree, actually. Yeah, I agree. We can possibly have that sitting on a natural outcrop. So, and a tower sitting in the center of it. Yeah, good one, Devin. Thank you very much for your contribution there. Appreciated. Pop that in there. Love it. Okay, then Alexander says, shouldn't the postern be normal section of wall or even thicker? But see, yes, it should. The thin section looks strange. It does look strange, but it makes it really easy to spot. When you're making a map of this ilk, often you've got to do things that are contrary to what is expected. If I just do what it should be, which is just a blank piece of wall, really, that's pretty much what you would expect, possibly thicker. You can't see it, and everyone goes, "Where's the gate? Why did they not bother drawing it?" So making it look different, even when it's not necessarily what it should look like, generally just makes it an easier map to read and makes people enjoy the map more. So I agree with you 100%, but I'll probably stick it with this way, maybe just sticking it up a little bit, purely because it just makes it easier to read. And most people don't care about the minutiae. They're far more interested in what's the cool thing there, how's my GM described it, and away we go. And for the people who do actually care about, well, wait a minute, why does it look like that? Surely it shouldn't look a bit different. They just change it themselves. They'll use their own descriptions. They'll happily rewrite anything that you've written in a weird way, or redraw anything, I suppose. But yeah, I think that's I think it's fine. If you disagree, feel free, dive in, say, no, Andy, you're wrong, change it, and I probably will. Yab says, how are the ghouls getting past the wall in this scenario? Oh, yeah, that's largely what I said. Do we assume that the gate postern here is left open most of the time? No, we don't. We assume that it's closed, and we adventure hook it open. And we adventure hook it open to potentially... in fact, this is possibly a good way that we can draw the PCs to the Nurgle cultists. So we've got ourselves a fundamental Morian who accidentally leaves it open because he believes that the portals have to be left open because it was created as an effigy of a Morse portal, and it really upsets him that it should be shut. That in turn has caused ghouls to slip in, or some equivalent, and they've made their way into the old tunnels there, and they're causing the local Nurgle cultists some problems. So the Nurgle cultists can hire PCs or some equivalent to get rid of them, which allows them to then find out about the local Morian who's responsible for this occurring, and also gets them in contact with the Nurgle cultists. So we've got a nice wee way we can pull them all together there into a nice little loop of potential stories. Shadows for each headstone? Yeah, fuck off. Yeah, Martin, sure. Yeah, like I'm going to do that. Alexander says, I would make these incursions very, very sporadic. Maybe there are a few natural tunnels under the walls leading outside, but only traversable on rare occasions like a drought or low groundwater levels. I think it's easier just having the Morian leave the bloody gate open like an arse. Yao says also, I don't think there'd be any sewers even under the noble rich houses in the hills. I think I broadly agree with that. I think that it's going to be each of them individually dealing with their sewage and equivalent themselves, probably tossing it down the side of the cliff walls. Even if a sewage pipe is a tad thin, even for a ghoul, I agree. There's a problem of where would that sewer go, as we've got nothing for that anywhere. Yeah, I agree. And I think that possibly just having it slide down into the outside walls is a far better way of dealing with it down just on the outside of the city. Alexander says that the Duke wants to impress, sewers are definitely a thing. I agree with that also. Even a bit oversized, but functionally very poorly, maybe already broken. There is now a small sewage waterfall into the slums. I think that that's quite likely from individual buildings, but I don't think there's a proper established sewage work. It's each one of the individual buildings has come up with its own solution for how they're going to get rid of the effluvium. Whether that is they've got themselves toilets which just deposit it further down the scale into the slums, for example, or whether they've got some pipes in place that pipe it out to the outside, for example, or whether they just have servants chucking the crap over the wall. I'm sure that they can come up with their own solutions for this, but I don't think that an established sewage system here has properly occurred. As we already discussed in previous streams concerning the lower areas, because of the high water table, the fact it's so wet, it makes building a sewer very difficult. It makes having a cellar that isn't super damp really difficult. So sewering this place will be a really big job. And it's something that I think has yet to be done. It's definitely something that I think would be on the cards if they were willing to spend the enormous amount of coin that would be required to build them. And I think there's definitely going to be pressure from, say, the cult of Shalia for a proper sewer to be put in place so that we can take all the filth away from the ground level and bring it under and then out into the water, meaning that people won't get as ill as often. And I think our Nurgle cultists will be deeply against that idea for a variety of interesting and effluvium-based reasons. So, yeah, I think we're cool without, unless you disagree. Yalib says, also, the tunnel, as far as I understand, was supposed to go from the garden under the Rich Folks Hills, starting in the cliff face, not on the other side of the wall. Agreed. Martin says, if not sewers, at least basements that might have accidentally breached the older burial tunnels. And I think that is a good idea. And I think that's how our Nurgle cultists get down. Wouldn't they carve basements that deep in the stone? I guess it depends on how deep they would be. I think that's a question. And I think possibly there's only one that's gone that deep for one reason or another. Perhaps it was their attempt to build a sewer that failed. It was left abandoned. It collapsed at some point. It broke through to one of the old sepulchres at some point. It got discovered by a kid. When he becomes an adult, he then uses that as his method of getting out of town, or at least a young man, and then he can be our Nurgle cultist, and that can be their primary route through his estate down into there. That'd be one way of dealing with that. Esty then says, since Mor is Myrmidia's father, very true, does that mean that he is a new god or is he old? He's one of the oldest gods. If you take a look at the Tome of Salvation, it goes into that for some depth, and it's sort of mentioned elsewhere, but Mor is one of the oldest gods. He's been around since the beginning. Mor is often lumped in with the classical gods because he's such an important deity in the southern old world. But in the north as well, Ostermark has been worshipping Mor in the same way that Talabecland has worshipped Tal, or Middenland has worshipped Ulrich, or indeed Reikland would come to worship Sigmar. There's a concept of the Quindeus. That's the 5 core old gods, and Mor is one of them. So yeah, Mor, Manan, what is it? Mor, Manan, Tal, Ryan, Ulrich, the Quindeus. So one of the oldest gods. What is the timeline for the introduction of the different gods to the Empire? That is a long and relatively complicated discussion, but loosely, Ulrich came with the Teutigans. Mor came along with the Ostrogoths. Manan came along with what would eventually become the Wasteland lot, whether you want to go with the Wastutans or whoever. Each of the old tribes of what became the tribes of Sigmar came along with their own deities, sometimes deities. And this has been discussed in a couple of places in the lore. And cut a long story short, Solent had Sul, who is effectively Solkin. And Solkin is on the out in the same way that Solent is on the out, but that doesn't mean that Solkin doesn't kick around. In the Empire, Solkin was was originally known more as Sul, the sun god, he that burns out everything, and became somewhat of a god of vengeance. If you go to Hochland, their original god, I think, was Lupus, which got taken over by Ulrich. Ryo is arguably the gods all came with the tribes, and some gods came externally. Gods that came externally were gods like Renald. Renald was not one of the old tribal gods of what would become the Empire. Neither was Shalia. So they came along with the Tillians, but we're not talking recently. We're talking like Verena was in the Empire over 2,500 years ago, almost the time of Sigmar, spreading the concept of using letters, teaching people how to do things. Nuln has had a temple of Verena for like 2,500 years in one variety or another. So even the classical gods, the gods that came after the old Empire's gods, they're not exactly new. The only really new one is Myrmidia in terms of new to the Empire. But even then, she's been kicking around in the Empire for a good 1,000 years or so. It's just more recently that she's become much more popular. It was the Crusades that really brought her back, and that was all the way back in the 1400s. And a variety of knights came back with the concept of Myrmidia being awesome, and several of the old knightly orders swore to her. But even then, Myrmidia was known before that because she was such an influential goddess in Estalia and Tilia. Her cult, the cult of Myrmidia, is almost certainly the biggest cult in the old world by a significant measure. It's got a larger standing army than pretty much any other cult. It's got more members than pretty much any other cult in terms of its clergy. And yeah, it's huge, but not necessarily in the Empire. It's just our focus on the Empire, because Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is traditionally always focused on the Empire, that's left Myrmidia always looking like she was one of the smaller deities. Again, to a degree, the Tome of Salvation upended that and tried to make it clear that Myrmidia was, if anything, as big, if not bigger, than some of the other gods. So to cut a long story short on that one, what's the timeline for the introduction of the different gods? They mostly arrived with the tribes of Sigmar, ranging from about 3,000 years up to about 3,500 years ago, depending on when you think they arrived. About 2,500 years ago, the core sets of gods that we all know today were largely in the Empire. By about 300 to 400 years, they were all in the Empire, because that's when Myrmidia became strongly worshipped in the south, when Myrmidia actually manifested in the real world as a mortal and wandered around kicking everybody in and binding Tilia and Estalia together as one great nation until she was killed by Skaven. And then, well, that came to an end. Tilians claimed that she was a Tilian, Estalians claimed she was an Estalian, and thus the cult is almost two cults. The cult of Estalia and the cult of Tilia were two very different versions of what Myrmidia should be. Anyway, we don't need all of that. That gives you a very loose tale there. If you have any more questions, feel free to pop them in. As for the poster on the map, I get wanting to signify it being there, but I think making it slightly thicker than normal wall instead of thinner would read better. I'm cool with that. I have no particular care one way or the other. It can now be seen. Right, Yal then says accidentally left it open. Yeah, accidentally. The Wayne Mansion basement was pretty deep. It certainly bloody was. Yal then says also, when and why did Narcosis end up being tied to the tunnels? I think it must have blacked out for a second, missed something there. I can't remember where that one started. As I recall, our young group of poets are into the gay and the previous era, and this is a perfect representation of that, and tying them through that into the city through that, I think works really nicely for giving them a route into the greater city to do whatever it is they want to do, whether that's hang around in some slums or otherwise. But yeah, I'm well up for them going in through that direction, unless others think it's rubbish. Yalb says, we already have the nobles shooting clay ducks over the slum district. Yes, we do. Now we want them to also dump sewage there by the bucket load as well. I have no problems with that. Martin says, I did posit in the Discord that bucket seller was just a huge turnover of buckets as they supplied them as chamber pots. Night soil was hugely important to certain districts. Certainly was. Can't go wrong with a good gong farmer. Can you mute the word bucket in chat? You do love your buckets. Martin says, I hate all correct. Night soil. It's okay. I knew what you meant. Alexander says, I imagine the sewer just under the noble house on the hill and piping the sewage out to the east into the natural body of water. I think that's very likely. But as long as I get my sewage water fall into the slums, I'm happy. I imagine some of it probably would go down there for the buildings that are in that direction. It'll just be left to fall down the cliff. And anyone who decides to sit on the other side, well, on their head be it. I'll give an example of this. I used to live in a lighthouse, which Prangin has come up in the stream more than once. And the lighthouse is not connected to the sewer system at all. It had its own individual pipes, and the toilets just went down and out onto the cliff and just out into the rocks. And that was it. Because that's how it was handled back in the 19th century when that particular building was built. They didn't build sewers or any equivalent because there was no need to do so. All you need to do is get a single pipe to normal toilets inside the house. They all flushed. It was piped into the pipe network for water, but it was into the water mains. But it wasn't. It didn't have any individual sewers. It was just pipes that went down and stuck out. And I imagine that several of the noble houses will largely do the same thing. They will have some sort of fallout that drops, some sort of drops loosely because that's how it will work. I have one concern with the current shape of the garden. It nicely fits within the wall. That is a recent addition. Should we have some open space there and maybe the garden wall curving in? It doesn't neatly fit in there. As I've already mentioned, the garden is also on the outside, but we'll draw that when we do the outside of the walls. So some of the overgrown sections will be on the outside of the walls. The wall has bisected it, and I think that has caused some annoyance with the Cult of Moor. And we can use that as for a little bit of extra spice with the Hallskrugs and the Cult of Moor. Or do we assume that the wall cut across the garden? Yeah, I think that is the assumption. Yeah. Esty says, I believe the idea is we get more wall outside the garden. Yes, we will do. Magnus. Hi, Magnus. I'm just in to wait and say hello before I go to bed. Delighted to see you made it. Before you go to bed, I'm going to be stopping relatively soon, but I would like to finish off this Garden of Moor first. So that we remember it, I'm going to loosely put in a shape for when we do the outside of the walls. This bump here is because that's a bit of a raised area, and the path will be going out that way. And that reminds us where we're going to be putting the extra bit of the garden. Alexander then says maybe some crumbling walls on the outside of the old walls of the garden. Absolutely agree completely. And Waves, good night, Magnus. Delighted you managed to pop in. Right, so I think that we've got a strong idea of what this place is. We've got ourselves at least one important sepulchre. We've got ourselves some potential ones that are dug right into the side of the stone here. We've got ourselves some larger ones for noble families and officers in the south here. We've got our paupers lot sitting over there. Graves all the way through this place. It's full. I imagine it's sunken in a few places. The high water table has meant that the graves in this area here are a bit boggy, where the graves over here, which are on slightly higher land, are better. I imagine this all is on slightly higher land than the rest of this city, and that's one of the reasons why the Garden of Moor was chosen to be up here, because you could actually bury without worry that would just rise up in the water table and then float off somewhere. But that over the course of the centuries, this part here has slowly slumped downwards, subsided into the boggier ground, meaning that we can have some of the older sepulchres collapsing slightly. They're a bit broken, perhaps boggy on the inside. They perhaps went down originally into a lower level, and that's filled with water. There might be a couple of bones swimming about down there, and it's just not a particularly welcoming place in many parts of it. As we move up the hill towards some of the older, more established sepulchres up here, they're all still largely in decent repair. But some of them will be a good couple of 100 years old. And if you've ever visited a graveyard, you know that once you pass 100 years, everything starts to get worn away by time. And even the ones that are held perfectly inside lovely sepulchres, a lot of those will be broken. And the elements will get in and largely break them up in a variety of ways. So I think that most of these are not necessarily in good repair. Some of them, though, still are. And we're going to want to have our military ones. I'm going to put another one in there. Our military ones quite visitable, so to speak. Yeah, quite like that. I'm liking just the feel for this place. It feels like a place. Right, so I'm going to put my shades on and my colouring on and all the rest of it. How many of these are actual special locations? I'm going to say that the old cottage is. It's abandoned and we need a nice little tale, perhaps a haunted. It was not going to be haunted, we're in a Garden of Moor. But we definitely want something for that old place. One of the sepulchres will be marked out as a special location. The other ones won't be. That's the ones moving in. And this is the one that our Nurgle cultist moves through. The big one is going to be marked in for one of the important noble family sepulchres. This is probably the primary family burial ground for that noble family. So we're looking at one of the families that swear to their liege lord, the Hallskrugs. And this is their one. So they're probably going to be local. They're probably going to be involved with the state army. we'll mark this as one long location, which is the various war memorials. Let's sit along that path. And we also want to have one other marked out that we can detail over in Discord, which is going to be probably the resting place of an important officer from the State Army barracks that chose to be buried here rather than elsewhere. And our adventure hooks for that location can be the family being very disappointed that he was buried here, not somewhere else, or possibly someone who's a descendant of them wanted to be buried with them, but butting up against the cult of Moor, who won't allow them to use the old garden. There's lots of different ways that we can potentially use that as a hook. So yeah, let's see if there's any other comments before I mark go down in that one. All right, so we need to have a somewhat important grave mausoleum, something in that outside part, something to figure out once we get to work on that part. I agree. I think that'd be really cool. Something that sits on the outside and isn't defended, and that causes issues. Possibly someone's wanting to protect it, put a wall up. Who knows? There's something we can do cool with that. Talking of night soil, do we want to have a Dunny Guild motto? If it smells, it sells. Possibly, although night soilmen and gong farmers and the equivalent were often too low in the rung to have a proper guild. They weren't so much a guild as they were basically like rag and bone men, collecting stuff and selling it on to others who would use it, guilds who found it useful. So I'm not sure they require their own guild, but if you can find a good example of why that shouldn't be the case, go for it. Yab says we need to make a large mausoleum in the center, a resting place for the Sigmarite priests from the village, and later rest of the time. Yeah, actually, that might be a good idea. We definitely need to have one for the Sigmarites. A lot that's put aside for them. Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure that I would rather the. Yeah. That might be better left to the summary part for the garden as a whole, as in one of the sepulchres is doing this, because are we necessarily going to have adventure hooks for that? Possibly. We could easily tie that in with the local cult. I'm undecided on that one. Let's see if you said anything else as we move down. Okay, so that one got marked for the local noble family. Yeah, I was deciding which one I preferred is a better idea. Can we get the spelling on that? Rest of the marks makes perfect sense. Do we want to mark something for the Sigmarites? Yeah, possibly. Or leave that for the description. Oh, yeah, possibly. It looks like you and I are thinking very much in the same lines here. Maybe there's a resting place of a local Sigmarite war hero. Yeah, like a saint or something. Yeah. Something that gets visited by Sigmarites, which means that they have a vested interest in keeping the place clear, visiting, or perhaps one minor order has a vested interest in it. They hold them as particularly holy, which also gives us an adventure hook of someone who's rather keen of getting a holy bone and employing PCs to steal a bone, and they accidentally get caught up in whatever other nefarious stuff we can throw at them down in the garden. So I think the answer to that is yes. So let's have ourselves one of the older ones that's begun to fall into disrepair, beginning to fall apart. The cult of Moor is refusing to let the cult of Sigmar update the place because of some local political reason. People are still visiting. Adventure hook for stealing something. There's all manner of things we can use that. You say on the outside walls, I'd rather have it in the inside walls because that reinforces the core ideal of Sigmar, which is defend the Empire. Have him on the inside because behind the walls of defense, it's just very Sigmarite. And I prefer that. Having him exposed on the outside is, I mean, it's potentially fun too. Undermine the core. I might prefer that, actually. I think you might be right. Let's see if there's any other comments before I decide whether to move it over. Does the chamber built in the cliff fit that role for the Sigmarite resting place? I'm not sure I'd like him to be buried under rock. I'd rather he's buried in the land down in Sigmar. I don't know. I'm still flummoxed as to what I think is the best idea here. Let's see if there's any more comments to nail it in place. Where a piece of Sigmar that was part of the garrison could be buried outside, his grave being disrupted by ghouls. Yeah. I do quite like the idea of his grave being disrupted, the Cult of Sigmar being annoyed. There's lots of things we can do that. And the Cult of Sigmar would be a bit peeved that he got left on the outside. Yeah. I think that makes a better story. So I'm going to remove my part there, and I'm going to drop it in up here. It's on the outside, and let's have a part of it broken in to, add to their general peevement. And we can finish off the rest of that location when we do the outside, but we will mark it in a location color now so that we remember. Then it should be added to the location guide. Okay, cool. Let's slap some color on these. And once I've done the color for each of our locations here, I will check the comments one more time, and unless anything is changed from that, I will then get my highlighting shading in place, and we'll get our Gardevoir largely done. There was an awful lot of chat for this one today, but I think it was good chat. We've established ourselves a strong cult of Nurgle, who like to, like the sad gossip they are, hang around graveyards. Reminds me of me when I was younger, doing live roleplay. I may have hung around in graveyards more time than I care to mention. I was, however, playing White Wolf games, so no great surprise in that. Vampires and werewolves obviously hang out in graveyards. We all knew that. Let's work around here. Tower, other tower for the other end. Oh, no, I don't think we require the gate to have its own location. The gate can merely pop up in adventure hooks for other NPCs and similar. Okay, we're almost there. Make sure we color these all in to give the idea of the slightly larger burial areas. If I think on the burial grounds, the very old burial grounds that you'd find in smaller towns that I visited, a lot of them were tiny. They weren't very big at all. So this is actually quite a sizable graveyard. And I think that is appropriate because of the State Army barracks that we've got here. Yeah, that works well. Pop in my wall color. We've got that marked too. Love it. Okay, so we've got ourselves most of the Gardevoir there. Do the highlights and shades after I've checked the comments. I have left a comment up. I didn't even notice. Yab says, could even come back as a wraith to defend that part of the garden from ghouls. Right, so this is an interesting point concerning can you come back as a ghosty? Generally speaking, if you've had the correct rites of more placed upon you by a blessed priest, the answer is probably not. But given that this is potentially a saint, it doesn't need to be a wraith. It can quite literally be a blessed servant of the gods, the equivalent of a demon, but for Sigmar. Now, obviously, we don't necessarily dwell on the idea of blessed servants too much. because the idea of them, our goody gods having demons, has always been a bit of a, I mean, do they? But the answer is yes, they do. The cult of Sigmar has blessed saints. And do some of them come back? Well, that's entirely up to you and whether you decide that Sigmar is actually a god in your setting or not. Regardless of where Age of Sigmar went, there's a constant undercurrent in many of the Sigmarite mythologies, where Sigmarite's not really a god. He's nothing more than the collected populace of the Empire's belief that he's a god. And he never actually was raised to divinity by Elric at all. That's certainly what the cult of the Purple Hand believe, for example. They don't just share that shit because it's mischievous. They actually believe that shit. That's fun. It's a nice aspect of it. But if you look at the other gods, the most common divine servants you generally see are either saints or alternatively they're divine messengers, like the ravens of Mor, and they could call their way in at a death, and they help fairy spirits. Well, they don't literally ferry them. That's a little bit more real world, but they carry the spirits over to the portal, where they then pass through and move on to the realms of death, which are, generally speaking, pretty damn grim in the Warhammer world. Effectively the equivalent of limbo, lest you should be going to some other god's realm. I don't think Wraith is quite the right idea, because Wraiths are generally in Warhammer world used to be undead. I mean, I don't think under normal circumstance he would come back as undead, and if he did, he would be pissed. Whether sepulchres in the rock could be where the Sigmarite priests are buried, could be, but we don't necessarily need to mark that. You could also separate from this guy. I quite like the idea of it being on the outside now, though. I think it's definitely fitting the story well. Maybe it's a local rite for Sigmarites that acolytes have to make a vigil at the grave for several nights. Novitiates, as in new members of the cult. Local thing. I don't think that we have an established local, enough of an established local Sigmarite tradition for that to be the case. I mean, we've got ourselves the new buildings, and we've got ourselves the old temples. We've got ourselves some new build temples. The idea of going and, is it a tradition or is it something that the local priest likes to do? I think that's certainly the case, because he was a saint and he's on the outside of the walls. Yeah, I definitely think he's on the outside of the walls. Anyway, for what we can decide if we want one of the cultists, Yalb says, and for that we can decide if we want it to be one of the cultists or not. Yes, we can. Yalb says, should the garden walls be colored yellow? I kind of did some of it yellow. I'm not entirely convinced they should be. And this could be a problem for the Nurgle followers who want to use a smaller gate. Yes, it would be. Martin says, given the prominence of Sigmar within Kalegen, it'd be interesting to see the reason for leaving the burial chamber outside. And I think the reason will almost certainly be a political and practical reason. The practical reason being it's cheaper to just move the wall straight through the center. The political reason being Kalegen is run by the Hallskroogs, and the Hallskroogs, for all they want the legitimacy of Sigmar, frequently get upset because they don't fully get it, because the Emperor has the legitimacy of Sigmar, so they pose themselves on the other side, and they purposely annoy. And this will be, I imagine, a petty annoyance at some point. Yalab says, well, the reason for me a cheap bastard, probably that way the wall cuts straight across. Yeah, I agree. I think that makes sense. Andy says also, Yalab, not Andy. Yalab says, also Andy doing Vampire the Masquerade LARPs and Graveyards, maybe the darkest thing I've heard in a while. Lindsay and I met doing Vampire the Masquerade LARPs. She was a Toreador. I was a Silver Fang. It was a Romeo and Juliet moment, although I was a Silver Fang that was pretending to be a vampire because of the various crazy stories that we were following at the time. Good times. We were young. I was a teenager, so was she. That was a long time ago. Good evening, guys and girls. Good evening, Alan. I'm glad to see that you've made it. As always, if you've got anything you'd like to add, go for it. Wraith Demon Tomato. Yeah, that's fair. No longer living Sigmarite. I get what you're saying, Yalab. Yalab then says, I don't think we should have the Sigmarite novitiate here. One of the local priests could be doing something at that grave, possibly, just as a pissing contest with the Morians. I agree. You can't go wrong with a pissing contest between the cultists. That is actually a solid meet cute. Yeah, it was pretty cute. In fact, Lindsay's first words to me, I remember them well. We were in a pub in Dundee because inevitably you LARPed in pubs, right? And we're in Pub Dundee. I was being a werewolf, and she blasted by me because she was the Toreador Primogen, and she said, "Get this buffoon out of my way." Her first words to me. Love at first sight. Right. Let's put in our shadows and get this place shaded off. Get the greens in, and in fact, I'm going to leave that comment up because it's quite small. And if any more comments come in, I'll be able to find them super easy because that comment's marked on my list here. Right, so shades. Let's get the shades in. So I want this to be a bit of a rise. I want that to be relatively large. I'll put my walls. Tower goes over the wall, up and over to the other side. Walls on the other side. All of that will be in shade. Right, good. This section will be in shade as well. Shouldn't be doing that when it's on the outside of the walls. Can't help myself. Okay. Not much for this one. It's pretty good. All right, highlights. I'm just going to dive straight onto those now so that we have no delay. As I'm doing this, the next job will be, where do we go next in our city? Where are we going to be going in our next stream? Where do we intend to map out next? What I'll do is, rather than necessarily decide upon that today, instead, I'll drop it up as a post over on Patreon in the blog, and everyone can post up there what their preference would be. That means I can definitely ping everybody who's a patron, and they can put their words in if they wish to do so. If there's anything that they particularly would like to see. Right, so let's get some green underneath that color. I believe my green that I was using was up about there. Let's just double check. Oh, that is very bright. Let's dull that down a little bit. That's better. Okay. That's a little bit bright still. I'm going to tone that down in a moment. Bring it down to there, add in a bit of that too. Poppers off by themselves. Okay, cool. That is pretty simple. Yeah, that sort of looks like a place, doesn't it? I would know. I never LARPed. LARPing was great fun. Although you need to have a lot of boundaries in place, because if not, it ruins relationships. So you need to have an awful lot of talking to each other, because unlike tabletop roleplay where you just say, I do X, Y, and Z, in LARPing, you often don't. Some people have rules in place so that nobody can ever touch. Others don't, and they like shake hands and they're hugging, and then suddenly they're off having an adventure with somebody who is of the opposite sex or that they are otherwise attracted to, and then suddenly a new relationship is formed because it's a lot more immediate. Don't know why I suddenly focused on that part. LARPing is pretty fucking awesome, actually. Alan says, I'm in favor of long shadows. Just I see what you did there. Alexander says, you're never too old to start LARPing. No, I agree. In our LARP, there's quite a lot of people who were much older, and it worked particularly well for Vampire because you had some people who were super young, like as young as 16, playing off against people who were in their 50s. And sometimes people who are young as 16 were playing characters of more power and more significance than the far older ones who were sired perhaps far later. And it made for some really fun dynamics and mixing of people that you wouldn't normally see. Great fun. Did enjoy it a lot. I was when I was in my teens. I was reffing it back then, and then in my early 20s. Well, we get a first JPEG or PNG of the current map with the post. I can drop that out as well. I'll pop that up on Patreon as well while I'm at it. So we'll basically do a this is where we are with the map. What will we do next post? I'll pop that up tomorrow. Yalib says we did all the historical parts. We're moving on to the new. That's fair for the most part. So I'm satisfied we can go wherever. Yeah, I agree. I think wherever does make sense. Let's zoom out and have a quick look at the overall map. I'd like to do loosely something that has a different tone to what we've been building so far. I think that's my only stipulation. So I'll probably choose like 2 or 3 different areas and say which one of those interests people the most. Pop it up as a poll, either on Patreon or pop it over onto Discord. And we can go from there. Kind of fancy, for example, doing a Middenball field. Kind of fancy doing the palace, although that's somewhat similar to doing the State Army barracks. Kind of fancy really getting down and dirty with one of the slums. That could be quite fun. Not so keen to do the barge building area because it's going to be a lot of similarities to the shipbuilding sections that we've just been doing. So I think I'd probably leave that until a little bit later to give us a bit more distance. But we do have quite a few sections in the middle that would be quite fun, middle class. Now, if I bring up my color sections for what goes where, arrives. Yeah, we've got a bit of parkland that we could possibly put in over there too. Yeah, there's all sorts of. There's like a big park that sits here at the foot of the upper class area. That could be fun as well. There's all manner of cool places we could dive into. Gal says, do we jump straight to the rich folk and possibly to finish the perimeter? And there's an argument in that, finishing perimeter. I'll definitely include that on the list of potential next steps. So we have this stream finished off the State Army barracks, although I have a feeling I may noodle with it a little bit later because a lot of that was put into place rather quickly. I quite like the way that that's built up, though, over there. I think that we need to make sure that as we're doing the mapping around the city, that we have a few more rocky outcrops so that it doesn't just look like we have that single one that's risen out of nowhere. So a few more in that area, but that's obviously the defensible location. And it used to be completely surrounded by trees to make sure that we match with what we had earlier. And we have also done our old Garden of Moor, which I think has got quite a strong set of stories tied to it now. That will make it a place that is full of utility as a GM. So if you happen to be playing in the area, there's going to be all manner of cool shit that your players will be able to deal with in what is a relatively small part of the overall town. Yeah, I think we've built that up neatly. It's going to be some fun adventure hooks attaching to that. So I'm going to finish off with saying a few other things, maybe draw a little bit extra up there because it's bugging me. But my few extra things are, number one, the inevitable. Please like the video. It makes all the difference to me on my side. And do please subscribe if you haven't already subscribed. That means you can get pings when we do stuff. Obviously, this channel is going to be used extensively when we start streaming the Enemy Within campaign. At the moment, it's only got some mappy business, but it's going to have all manner of cool stuff up in it later. And we're also going to be doing lore chats and all manner of other stuff too. So hopefully the channel will have something you're interested in. So that's number one. Number two, I'm going to pop up a post on Patreon, as we've just discussed, regarding which part of the map that we will do next. I'll take in the various ideas. And if you've got any other preferences on that and you're watching right now, do drop it in because I'll probably take those into account when I put up the post. And we can get that all put into place for next Thursday. Next Thursday, we'll be streaming at 7, like always. On top of that, I'm going to be doing a tutorial for mapping over on the Rookery for the inside the Rookery side. I'm putting a post up for that on the weekend. If you've got anything you'd like to see me map beyond just mapping the castle, for example, if there's anything else, either ping here or over in the Rookery. The Rookery would be a better place to place this. Say what you'd like me to map on the inside the Rookery side, and I'll get that organized. As I mentioned before, every technique that I'm using on this map, I've already done a tutorial for. So if you're interested in mapping like this, go watch that tutorial. It should hopefully help you out. And other than that, I think we'll probably call it a halt unless anyone's got anything else that they would like us to do. as always, enormous thanks to everybody that's dropped in. I am indeed going to drop in a few extra shadows as I am dropping here. Long shadows, perhaps. Yeah, I am going to do, in fact, I'm going to, before I quickly check the comments, I'm going to, because it's really bugging me, just put in a few extra details up to the top here, because there's no reason that I don't just finish it off. Now, this, we can have some broken sepulchres on the outside, some old graves, some toppled parts that have fallen over. Some old ones there too. I feel that if we've already decided what's going to be here, there's no reason for me not to very quickly put some of that into place so that I don't need to do it later. Just a little bit, enough that I get the idea, and I'll drop the road out and connect it up to the new Garden of Moor as well. Okay. And we'll have it come in from that side and then down. So it's going to come in through the front. It's a relatively thin path. I've gone a bit too thick there, I think. There we go. For when we do that. Yeah, that's a little bit better. I can sort of feel how that's working. Let me just check the comments for I recall you being tired of drawing slums, but I guess we actually ended up doing some other things since then. Yes, we have, and the slums that we'll be doing elsewhere will be quite different. The ones that we did up here were these slums in particular were new builds that had collapsed the slum rather than a proper slumland with lots of tight buildings and spirals, which would be quite fun. Low parameter perimeter. Yeah, it's okay. I gathered what you meant. Alexander then says, did you manage to do a test recording for the actual play? So last week we didn't do our test recording because our table it rained and the table's so big that I can't do it in the house or the garage. It's just too big. Doesn't we thought it would fit in the garage and we thought we could do it in there, but there just wasn't enough space to get everything on it that we needed. Now I'm going to be doing a big post over on the Patreon about how we built our table. Cut a long story short and just down to its basics. It's a big bit of wood with lino on top of it so that we can make it look pretty. And it looks pretty damn cool. And it sits on top of another table. But doing that turned out to be a whole job. And I did that today. It's why my hand aches and this stream has been particularly painful for me. But yes, we didn't do that. We're hopefully doing that tomorrow, assuming that all goes according to plan. And if it's not raining outside and my table hasn't been completely ruined, we'll be bringing it in to the garage tonight at about 10-11. So when Lindsay gets home, we'll be taking it out to the garage and then it'll hopefully be dry and ready to sit in the middle of my living room and be recorded around. All the cameras are all ready. We're all ready to go in that regard. Martin says, maybe plonk the new Garden of Moor on a tor that is split into fingers like columns. I definitely think that our Garden of Moor needs to be on some sort of rise. And I think that, yeah, they're potentially reinforcing the local topography might be a good idea. We could even have a nice little tale about that. Yeah, I quite like that. Alan says, yay, yay, in return. Yalab goes, would that external section get that beat up since the wall was built? It's been just 20 years and there are perhaps people in the city still taking care for that. I think the answer is yes, and we'll build a story for why. I think that there is going to have been 20 years ago an argument that it wouldn't get beat up, it would be fine, except it did. And that will just cause yet more issues with the Cult of Moor and those responsible for building that wall. SD goes, going with the wide and straight roads radiating from the fort so you can shoot down them. Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Surrounded by it's fun. Yeah, good call, SD. In fact, let's remember that and mark it in place so that we can definitely get some cannon fire going down in corridors. I'm going to mark that on with some roads just so I remember it. And this is super weak. Obviously, we're already going that direction. We can go in that direction too. I will reinforce that with a proper road later. Yeah, totally. Slightly wider, slightly thicker roads. I like that one. Thanks, Esty, for reminding me. Yeah, it says also it probably would still have its wall. No. And I think that, yes, it would have done if it hadn't been half broken down, which is exactly what we're going to do on the outside. The whole thing has been kind of messed up. And the reasons behind that, I think we won't discuss just now because there's lots of different reasons that we could have. Right. Okay. With that, I think we should call it an end. Thank you very much for turning up, everyone. We're coming up to 10 o'clock, which means we've been streaming for almost 3 hours. I think today has come up with some pretty damn decent developments. Although we didn't necessarily do a lot of drawing, we have really nailed down some pretty cool places in the temple down to the south, obviously. Not the temple, probably the fort down to the south, obviously. But also with the development of our upper classes, our cult of more that's tied directly through to the youth of the upper classes, and possibly also through an academic connection tied through to Dr. Festus, who will eventually sack Altdorf. So we got those nice little details beginning to hook up and link into each other, because if this place is so important to Altdorf, tying it into the fall of Altdorf, I think is quite fun too, particularly if we can get someone from that Nurgle cult be someone who is going to potentially be part of the reason that the entire city falls. That could also be pretty damn cool. So with that, I will say goodbye. I'll look at our last comments, which are hopefully saying goodbye and not Andy, you suck. Let's have a quick look. They say, thanks for the stream, Andy. Great fun as always. Delighted to have you here, Yalab, as always. Esty says, great stream as always. Good night, everyone. Good night to you too. Alexander says, thank you for the stream. See you next week. You will indeed. Yalab says, good night, but to the chat, of course. And Devin says, great stream. Glad to chat one in person. It has been delightful chatting to you also. Martin says, great stream as always. And also, Alan's dropped in to say, thanks, Andy. Have a good evening. Logging tables, I will. Martin also adds, night all. And the boat person says to Andy, thanks for the stream. May I also add a couple of things right at the very end. Number one is, if you would like to be a part of helping develop Kalegen beyond just making the comments here, dive into our Discord. Heron also says, goodbye, great stream, good night. Thank you very much for dropping by, Heron. Dive into our Discord where there are posts put up for every single location in the city. So if you go back through the previous 9 streams and this stream, there's a post up there because Martin went mad and posted them all. Thank you, Martin. You are a god. That's Martin there, Martin Ironrook. He posted up a post for every single one of the locations. So if you've got any ideas for how any of them could manifest, or if you've been watching one of the streams and you think, oh, it'd be really cool if we had an NPC like that there, go pop it into the Discord channel, mark it there, and we will probably pop that into the overall Lawhammer World Anvil side of things too. Equally, if you fancy yourself to be a budding writer and want to actually start writing up one of these locations, you can start writing them up directly into one of those posts, or alternatively get in contact with me if you just like to work on the World Anvil side. If you think yourself as someone who'd like to write 20, 30, 40 locations, get in contact. Over on Discord, I can be found there easily, and we can sort you out for World Anvil access too. But other than that, thank you all. It has been a joy. I am now going to go and look at my table and see whether it's been blown away, because I've been streaming for 3 hours not paying attention to the weather. Have yourself a marvelous evening, and until next week, I'll see you then. All right, bye-bye!